It's really hurting me inside. I cannot sit and hold her. Will you please bring me back my child?
On July 10, 1998, in the quiet stillness of a hospital room in Jacksonville, Florida, a life-altering event unfolded. 16-year-old Kamiyah Mobley cradled her newborn daughter, Kamiyah, in her arms, her heart overflowing with love and hope for the future together. Little did she know, within the halls of the hospital, a sinister plot was about to unravel. A stranger disguised as a nurse entered Kamiyah's room, offering comfort and companionship. But in an instant, the joy of motherhood turned to anguish as this imposter snatched Kamiyah's precious baby girl and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a shattered dream and a heartbroken mother. Who could have taken little Kamiyah away from her mother? Would Kamiyah ever be found? What could have been the motive behind such a heartless act? At just 16 years old, Kamiyah Mobley found herself thrust into motherhood when she gave birth to her first child, a daughter, on July 10, 1998, at the University Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida. She named her Kamiyah. Merely 8 hours after Kamiyah gave birth to Kamiyah on the morning of July 10, 1998, a nurse entered her hospital room. She stayed with Kamiyah for several hours, engaging in conversation and keeping her company. During this time, Kamiyah told her that Kamiyah's father, 19-year-old Craig Aiken, was in prison on charge of sexual assault because Kamiyah had been when he got her pregnant, and also for drug possession and delivery. But even though it seemed like life ahead for Kamiyah and Kamiyah would be difficult, Kamiyah was excited about the next chapter in her life. Around 3 p.m. that same day, the woman informed Kamiyah that she needed to take the baby out of the room briefly to check her temperature. At this time, Kamiyah's mother had just entered the room to see her little granddaughter for the first time. However, she could only catch a short glimpse of her before the nurse took her away for what they believed was standard hospital procedure. As Kamiyah's mother checked in on her and the two indulged in conversation, unaware of the tragedy that had already taken place, they realized that it had been a while since the nurse took Kamiyah away. They inquired with the other hospital staff about the nurse and learned that the hospital had no employee who matched the description of the nurse who took Kamiyah away. Kamiyah's heart broke when she realized that her child had been stolen. Kamiyah and her mother immediately contacted the Jacksonville Police Department and reported the incident. The quest to find the baby captured the nation's attention. The abductor was described as a woman aged between 25 and 47. She was wearing a nurse's flower print jacket, teal scrubs, and surgical gloves, as seen in grainy surveillance footage from the Jacksonville hospital. Investigators discovered that the woman had entered the hospital and deceived the staff by stating that she was a member of the Mobley family and later presented herself to Kamiyah as a medical professional. Following the abduction, the University Medical Center in Jacksonville implemented additional safety measures, including wristbands and ankle bands for newborns. They restricted access to the maternity ward and upscaled security protocols, including kidnapping drills. Meanwhile, as the search for Kamiyah continued, Kamiyah took legal action against the hospital and was granted a $1.5 million settlement. However, her ultimate desire, to be reunited with her daughter, remained unfulfilled. Detectives said that over the span of 18 years after Kamiyah's disappearance, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received more than 2,500 tips. Even though the original detectives on the case eventually retired, newer detectives kept the investigation going with unwavering determination. However, there were still many challenges. Since there wasn't even a single photograph of Kamiyah taken before her abduction, a computer-generated composite was generated to be circulated to the media. Distinctive features, such as Mongolian spots and an umbilical hernia, were highlighted in these reports. A reward of $250,000 was also put up for anyone who could bring Kamiyah home. But despite all the efforts by the detectives and general public, the kidnapper evaded capture and remained at large. In the next few years, all the leads in Kamiyah's kidnapping went cold. And even though the investigation remained open, Kamiyah's case wouldn't be solved until almost 2 decades later. The extensive search for baby Kamiyah Mobley concluded in January 2017. when the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office pursued leads that led them to Walterboro in South Carolina. At a certain point in 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had received information about a woman named Gloria Williams and her daughter Alexis, who had some discrepancies in her identification documents. The center passed this information on to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Gloria and Alexis had been residing in Walterboro, a small city with a population of about 5,400, situated approximately 50 miles west of Charleston. Acting upon these leads, cold case detectives from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office went to Walterboro, South Carolina, where they met with Gloria's daughter, 18-year-old Alexis Kelly Maningo. What seemed suspicious to the detectives was the fact that Alexis shared the same birthdate as Kamiyah, and soon enough, detectives discovered that Alexis's identity had been established through fraudulent documents. Alexis was made to undergo a swab test, and her DNA sample was compared to a sample of Kamiyah's DNA, which had been collected during her birth back in 1998. On the night of January 12, 2017, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Laboratory confirmed that the woman identified as Alexis was none other than Kamiyah herself. Following the confirmation of Kamiyah's identity as Shannara Mobley's daughter through DNA testing, the Sheriff's Office took legal action against Gloria. On January 13, 2017, Gloria was arrested on charges of kidnapping and interference with custody.
It's okay. I'm trying to be strong for you. I'm trying to worry about you. Okay?
And what's going on there, Mrs. Williams?
I'm telling her to behave herself, to be respectful to her family. I'm saying goodbye to her. I just wanted her to be okay.
Gloria opted to waive extradition during court proceedings and was transported to Jacksonville to stand trial for the charges. She was ordered held and detained without bond. Notably, when the detectives took a closer look into Gloria's past, they learned that she had a previous encounter with law enforcement, having faced charges related to check and welfare fraud. Gloria admitted that in 1998, she had traveled from South Carolina to Florida, assuming the role of a nurse to carry out the abduction of Kamiyah from her birth mother's care. At the time, Gloria was trapped in an abusive relationship and had lost custody of her 2 sons and had recently experienced a miscarriage, all serving as motive for her actions. Upon returning to South Carolina with Kamiyah, Gloria created a new identity for Kamiyah, naming her Alexis Kelly Maningo and portraying her as her own biological child. None of Gloria's relatives found it suspicious, as the last time they had seen Gloria, she had been pregnant. Unaware of her miscarriage, Gloria's loved ones never doubted her when she introduced Kamiyah as Alexis and her own daughter. Kamiyah had been residing in South Carolina for all these years under the alias Alexis and had been raised alongside Gloria Williams' 2 other children. Additionally, she had graduated from Colleton County High School and was even in a relationship with her loving boyfriend. At the age of 16, Kamiyah stumbled upon the truth of her abduction when she was looking to apply for a job and realized that she didn't have a social security number. This made her unable to legally work or even get a driver's license. It was then that Gloria chose to disclose the reality behind Kamiyah's lack of documentation. While Kamiyah understood what Gloria had done was wrong, she loved and respected her the same for the life Gloria had given her.
Gloria, what type of mother was she?
Very easygoing, down to earth, kind of lenient. I feel like I had a regular good childhood. Honestly, I don't have nothing bad to say.
Kamiyah grappled with the fear of losing the woman she had known as her mother all her life, and thus chose to keep the whole truth to herself. January 13, 2017, the day of Gloria's arrest, marked a pivotal moment for Shannara Mobley, as she finally found out that her firstborn, Kamiyah, was alive and safe. Although after Kamiyah's abduction, Shannara and Craig separated, Shannara went on to have 5 more children: LaShawn, Christopher, Christiana, Savannah, and Journey. But seeing Kamiyah, her firstborn, 18 years after her abduction, was an overwhelming experience for her. Kamiyah connected with her father and grandmother through FaceTime, eagerly planning to reunite with her biological family members in person. Kamiyah had never seen her biological father, and he had been incarcerated at the time of her birth. She traveled to Florida to meet her biological parents, Shanara and Craig, and the 5 younger siblings, embarking on the journey of building relationships with them. Simultaneously, she maintained connections with those she had known as her family for all this time, her brothers and grandparents in South Carolina, as well as with Gloria. During this period, certain news outlets suggested that Shanara and Kamiyah's mother-daughter relationship was facing challenges due to Kamiyah's love for Gloria. However, the members of the Mobley family immediately put these claims to rest, calling them false and baseless.
I never knew this day would come that I would finally face the kidnapper. She still doesn't understand that she's not Kamiyah's mother. What she has pumping through Kamiyah is lies. What I have pumping through Kamiyah is blood.
During Gloria's trial, a lot of people were of the opinion that since Gloria had given Kamiyah a good life, the crime wasn't that severe. But others refuted this by saying that Gloria kidnapped Kamiyah and she had never been her child to raise. On the other hand, Kamiyah refused to call Gloria a felon. She may have kidnapped her 18 years ago, but she also raised her with impeccable love and care.
She came in there and told me she was a nurse, and I thought that's what she was. She dressed it like one.
And did you trust her?
Yes, I did.
How are you doing mentally as a 16-year-old woman that's had your child taken?
Nightmares, self-medicating myself. I just didn't want to be here.
In February 2018, Gloria pleaded guilty to the charge of kidnapping and confessed to acting alone in the 1998 abduction. Later on June 8, 2018, Gloria was handed an 18-year prison sentence for the kidnapping of Kamiyah Mobley. As part of her plea agreement, Gloria was prohibited from profiting from her crime while incarcerated, thereby restricting her from entering into any book, television, or entertainment contracts. Following Gloria's sentencing by the Duval County Court, Kamiyah continued to reside in her childhood home. She also continued to maintain communication with Gloria and still regarded her as a mother figure. In March 2022, Gloria made an appeal to have her sentence reduced to 9 years. Gloria contended that her 18-year prison term was an extremely cruel and unusual punishment. She argued that at the time of the crime, she had recently endured a traumatic miscarriage and was exhibiting symptoms consistent with postpartum depression, as well as experiencing severe mental and emotional stress. She maintained that she was not of sound mind during the abduction. The plea also included a handwritten letter from Kamiyah supporting the motion. In the letter, Kamiyah stated that she wanted to make it very clear that Gloria was still her mother and would always be. Despite this, Gloria's appeal for a shorter sentence was dismissed. While serving her sentence at the Hernando Correctional Institution, Gloria has enrolled for a master's degree in business administration through Adams State University in Colorado and has been engaged in community service. Her release date is set to be July 9, 2034, just a day before Kamiyah's 36th birthday. Kamiyah's whole world was flipped upside down within moments when she learned the truth. Although Shanara was her biological mother, it was Gloria who had raised her with love and care. Kamiyah didn't want to choose just one family to be with, and so she fought hard to make the best out of her situation. Kamiyah has mentioned that she has maintained regular communication with both Gloria and her biological family in Florida. She now responds to both of her names depending on her location. She prefers Alexis in South Carolina and Kamiyah in Florida.
If you know me as Kamiyah, then you call me Kamiyah. I go by both.
While official documents such as job applications and Social Security utilize the name given by her birth mother, Kamiyah clarified in an interview with ABC's Good Morning America that her paperwork has the name Kamiyah Mobley despite her work name tag reading Alexis. Shanara, Kamiyah's biological mother, has described the strained dynamic between herself and Kamiyah, who still viewed Gloria as her mother, and because of this, she often found herself wishing that Kamiyah had never returned. Seeing Kamiyah, her own daughter, longing for the motherly love of Gloria, made Shanara feel like she was drifting away from Kamiyah every single day. As long as Kamiyah could go and see Gloria, she was her mother. Shannara didn't think that Kamiyah's return was a win for her in any way, and she was now in much more pain. To ease the situation, Shannara even thought of referring to Kamiyah by the name Alexis.
It's only one sentence, and I don't think she's open up for that. I would say death. I'm still hurting. When you reaching out to my child. That is my child. I am your mother, Kamiyah. I am your mother.
Shannara has expressed her desire for Gloria to remain behind bars for the rest of her life, as she hopes that this will allow her and Kamiyah to focus on rebuilding the relationship. Meanwhile, Gloria herself has made efforts to maintain some distance from Kamiyah so she could spend more time with her biological family. Despite the challenges, Shannara and Kamiyah remain committed to repairing their bond and focus on making up for the time they have lost.
1970. It was a day like any other in the quiet town of Gormley, Ontario. Albert Morley arrived home expecting a cheerful hug from his wife and son, but an unnatural silence hung in the air when he entered the house. Then, his son's scream shattered the silence. He rushed inside and found his wife, Doreen Morby, lying in a pool of blood on the floor. Police were called to the scene, and they found out that she was in fact assaulted and shot 7 times.
One of the most sadistic, meaningless murders that anybody could ever imagine.
While the police were finding the killer, just days later, another woman named Helen Ferguson, not very far from the Morbys, experienced the identical, unspeakable horror. Assaulted and shot in the head with her young child as a petrified witness.
Then when I went back and I thought about, well, this guy held a gun to my mother's head, made her have sex with him, and then killed her. And what was that like for her?
Was this a random act of violence, or was a sadistic serial killer stalking their peaceful town? But before we delve into uncovering the identity of the killer, let's take a closer look at the Morby family. Back in the 1970s, life was good for the Morby family. Albert and Doreen, a young couple, had just bought their own house in a quiet town called Gormley. Owning a home there was a sign that one was doing well in life. It was a safe neighborhood with lots of young families around. Doreen was a kind and caring person and had given up her nursing career to stay home with their 1.5-year-old son, Brent. She was 34 years old at the time. Life was good for the couple, and the future was filled with promises, but they didn't know what was about to hit them. On May 6, 1970, a little after 5 in the evening, Albert walked into his home after a routine grocery shopping. Something felt off right away. The door, unlike most houses in Gormley back then, was locked. Albert found it strange because people there usually trusted each other and didn't lock their doors. Albert unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent, except for the terrified cries of his son coming from down the hallway. Panic surged through him as he raced towards the sound of his son. The phone in the kitchen dangled uselessly off the hook, making him think of the worst. He found Brent, unharmed but clearly shaken, in the bedroom. But the sight that greeted him next was horrifying.
When he went into the house, he found his wife lying in a pool of blood with their 21-month-old son, Brent, with his legs pinned underneath her.
Doreen, his wife, lay face down in a pool of blood, and her hands seemed to clutch the back of her head.
Mrs. Morby was shot a total of 7 times, 5 times in the head and twice in the back.
Fear gripped Albert as he lifted up Brent and raced to the neighbor's house and called the police. The weight of the tragedy was settling upon him. The happy life they once knew had vanished, replaced by a nightmare that would forever scar the Morby family. As the police officers arrived at the Morby household, they were met with a grim scene of blood and confusion. Seeing the blood around Doreen's head, it seemed to them as if she might have fallen and hurt herself. But because of all the blood, they couldn't see her wound clearly. The officers didn't think that someone might have hurt her on purpose, and soon her body was sent to the medical examiner's office for a closer look. While they waited for the doctor's report, investigators looked around the house for clues. In the kitchen, the situation suggested that there had been a fight. This made them wonder if maybe Doreen hadn't fallen after all. They didn't know for sure yet, but they started to think someone might have killed her. Just in case, they dusted the house for fingerprints and collected hair, threads, and blood samples from the room where Doreen was found. The next day, the doctor's report came back with terrible news no one could have expected. The doctor who examined her noticed that she had injuries on her hands that showed she had tried to fight someone off. Even worse, the doctor said she'd been assaulted before someone shot her in the back of the head with a .22 caliber revolver. The pathologist who examined Doreen's body found something unusual. He took out 7 .22 caliber bullets from her body, 2 from her back, and 5 from her head. This was odd because most revolvers could hold only up to 6 bullets. This meant that whoever hurt Doreen had to stop and reload the gun before shooting her the 7th time. The detectives thought that this was atypical for someone to shoot 7 times. Furthermore, they looked into the different types of revolvers and learned that there was a very rare kind that could hold 9 bullets.
A 9-shot revolver in 1970 was not a very common gun.
With this new information, they went back to their list of suspects and took a closer look at Albert Morby. They considered him suspicious because he was the first person they had questioned on what happened to Doreen. Albert told them he left their house at 8 o'clock that morning to go for his job as a teacher. He cooperated with the police and also agreed to let them take a sample of his blood for testing. In 1970, detectives couldn't use DNA to solve crimes like they do now. When they found a semen sample from Doreen's test kit, they could only tell the killer's blood type, which was type A. This helped a little because 1/3 of the people have type A blood, but it wasn't enough to find the killer. So detectives had to do things the old-fashioned way. They went door to door in the neighborhood asking people about where they were and sought for their DNA samples. People in Gormley were really scared because they never had such a terrible murder happen so close to their homes. Gun sales went up because back then you could buy a gun without a background check. Little did they know that their worst fears would be soon realized when another devastating murder struck just 13 days later. Back on May 19, 1970, detectives were still looking into a murder case when their phones rang. A scared 9-year-old boy, Dale Ferguson, was on the other end saying someone just killed his mom.
She had a look on her face which I can't forget, and I just knew she was dead. Lifeless eyes, and she just didn't look like my mother at all.
Police raced to the scene and found 37-year-old Helen Ferguson dead. She was lying in a pool of her own blood, shot once in the back of the head and twice in the back with a .22 caliber gun. The details were chillingly similar to Doreen's unsolved murder from a few days prior. Just like in Doreen's case, the victim was a woman shot in the same way. An autopsy confirmed that Helen had been assaulted and that the attacker had type A blood. The investigation took an even stranger turn when they learned that Helen was a nurse, married to a school teacher just like the first victim. When they questioned her husband, Mr. Russell Ferguson, they were surprised to hear the same alibi Albert Morby gave in the first case, that he was at work during the time of the murder. There was, however, a crucial difference in this case. This time the police had a witness, Helen's son, Dale. He was 8 years old and had been at home, sick with the mumps that day, while his 2 siblings were away at school. According to Dale, just after lunch, the family dog started barking, and there was a knock at the door. He heard a man's voice telling Helen he had a sick child in the car and desperately needed her help. He might have wanted to use the phone, or maybe Helen was going to write down directions to the hospital. While Dale stayed in the living room watching TV, he heard his mom and the man go downstairs. Then, terror struck. A few moments later, Dale heard 3 loud gunshots.
At the time, I thought they were fireworks or firecrackers. That was the first thought was Mummy and that man are playing with fireworks.
The man then came back upstairs and walked past Dale's room. Realizing there was a child in the house, the man stared at Dale for a few seconds before running out. But surprisingly, Dale was left alive. The image of the attacker's face was burned into his memory. Dale also remembered a crucial detail, which the killer had done to hide the evidence.
And he rubbed the doorknob and out he went.
The police took Dale to the station, where despite the trauma, he was able to provide a very detailed description of the suspect. He even remembered the getaway car, a white or tan-colored 1960s station wagon. With this new information, a sketch of the suspect as well as his car was created and distributed to different cities across Canada. The police were flooded with tips, hoping one would lead them to the killer. The investigation focused on the strange connection between the 2 victims, both former nurses married to teachers. However, despite their efforts, they couldn't find any link between the families. The case remained a chilling puzzle, 2 seemingly random murders with an eerily similar pattern. Then the situation became so serious that the Ontario Provincial Police was called in. The fear of a serial killer on the loose had gripped the community. With 2 vicious murders in less than 2 weeks, everyone felt the killer wouldn't stop. People double-locked their doors, and some men even began working from home to ensure their wives weren't left alone. Authorities offered a hefty reward of $15,000, which is equivalent to around $100,000 today, for any information leading to an arrest. But a year passed. No new murders occurred that seemed connected to the perpetrator, now dubbed the .22 caliber killer by the media. During the first year of the investigation, police interviewed over 10,000 people and investigated more than 3,200 suspects across Canada. Despite the immense resources poured into the case, the task force assigned to the murders was disbanded after a year with no significant leads. The .22 caliber killer case remained unsolved, leaving a sense of unease and a community yearning for answers. The case remained cold for several years. Then in 1973, a glimmer of hope emerged. A landlady called the tip line, reporting that one of her former tenants, Donald Apostle, bore a striking resemblance to the police sketch. Not only that, but he also used to own a beige station wagon, just like the getaway car described by Dale. Donald was known in the community as someone who had been troubled by mental illness and a history of violent behavior. Rumors swirled that he had bragged about committing terrible things. He was currently residing in a mental institution in eastern Canada, coincidentally near one of the murder scenes. The police investigated his former residence, located not far from the crime. During the search, a chilling discovery was made: a handcrafted child's coffin hidden in the shed. This evidence painted a disturbing picture. The detectives traveled to the mental institution to collect a DNA sample from Donald. However, his response to their questions were incoherent, leaving them frustrated and empty-handed. Nevertheless, they managed to obtain his saliva sample for analysis. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. Donald's blood type was A, which matched the killer's. The fact that he was now institutionalized far away explained the lack of further murders. However, a major hurdle remained. He was deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental state. While the case remained officially unsolved, the police stopped actively pursuing other suspects and were convinced that he was the culprit. Years passed, and despite a strong belief among many residents that Donald was the killer, the victims' families were seeking a definitive closure. By 1996, forensic science had undergone a revolution. With this advancement, the Ferguson family approached the police requesting a renewed investigation. Although Donald Apostle, the initial suspect, had succumbed to brain cancer, the families wanted closure through DNA testing. Fortunately, human samples collected from both crime scenes had been preserved. However, when Donald Apostle's DNA was compared to the killer's profile, it did not match. This news, while disappointing, offered a silver lining. The investigators now possessed a complete DNA profile of the real killer. CODES, the national DNA database, was yet operational in Canada. Although they couldn't run a profile through a nationwide database, they now had a definitive genetic fingerprint, a far more powerful tool than just blood type. The Ontario Provincial Police investigating the .22 caliber case received a call that reignited the decades-old investigation. It came from the Sault Ste. Marie Police Department, a city roughly 400 miles north of Gromley. At the same time, Sault Ste. Marie had been experiencing a string of armed robberies at jewelry stores since June 1995.
It began in June of 1995 with a robbery in a private residence. Shortly after that, there was a robbery that we became aware of at a boutique. Then there was a robbery at a fur and jewelry store that took place beside the courthouse here in Sault Ste. Marie.
The perpetrator, according to witness descriptions, had a striking resemblance to the sketch of the .22 caliber killer. After several robberies, the local police were able to obtain a good sketch of the suspect. But a breakthrough came when the police got a significant lead from a pawn shop.
I got a call the following day from one of our detectives in Sudbury, and that an individual a week prior did attend this particular pawn shop and pawned off a ring that was similar in description to a ring that was taken from the robbery in Sault Ste. Marie.
Security footage captured the man pawning the ring, and crucially, he used his real driver's license for identification. This led them to Ronald Glenn West.
Did surveillance on the house. There's 2 vehicles in a driveway that matched the description of the vehicle that left the armed robbery in Iron Bridge.
Detectives had obtained a search warrant for West's home. Inside his home, they found stolen jewelry. Ronald West was arrested, and he pleaded guilty to robberies on August 5, 1995. He was convicted on 5 counts of armed robbery and sentenced to a 10-year term in Kingston Penitentiary. However, a new development came forth. The house he previously occupied was undergoing renovations, and the new owners made a startling discovery hidden in the bathroom ceiling: women's jewelry, nude photos, and an envelope.
Inside the envelope contained these 2 firearm permits with Ron West's name on it from 1969 and 1970.
The resemblance in the sketches, coupled with the incriminating items found in West's former residence, made the police suspect they might have their man. The man all of Ontario had been looking for. The tip from Sault Ste. Marie police seemed promising. The OPP investigators paid Ronald West a visit to determine if he was the man they had been chasing for over 2 decades. A key detail for the investigators was his previous residence. Ronald had grown up near Gormley, making him familiar with the area during the 1970s. As they delved deeper, investigators discovered even more chilling details. From 1968 to 1972, Ronald Glenn West had been a police officer with the Toronto Police Department's 53rd Division.
Other officers that we spoke to that he worked with thought he was kind of a quiet guy, kept to himself, nothing outstanding or anything along these lines.
He had voluntarily left the force in 1972. Coincidentally, his work record showed days off on May 6th and May 19th, the exact dates of the 2 murders. Police believe that West might have even been part of the task force in 1999, which investigated the very case he was now a prime suspect in. In 1995, Ronald West was a 52-year-old and unemployed, living with his second wife.
To while away the time, West wrote letters, including one to his wife in Toronto.
She didn't want to have anything to do with him, but especially after the embarrassment of him being arrested for the armed robberies and the home invasions.
This letter was a light bulb moment for the detectives, who were in desperate need for his DNA.
And she kept it for a while, and then she called us and advised us that she had the letter. She was throwing it out and wanted to know if we were interested in it.
After examining the partial DNA profile, the examiner came to a conclusion.
The person who had licked the postage stamp may well have been the person who raped both of these women.
Then, with a court order, the police were able to obtain a blood sample from West.
The numbers for one of the deceased women were in excess of 1 in 6 billion, the population of the world. So that's very, very conclusive DNA evidence.
The results were conclusive. Ronald West's DNA matched the DNA profile recovered from both crime scenes. The decades-old .22 caliber killer case finally had a suspect, and a former police officer at that. On August 26, 1999, justice was finally served. After nearly 3 decades, Doreen and Helen's family received some solace as Ronald West was charged with first-degree murder in both cases. The capture of West opened a new chapter in the investigation. Police began re-examining unsolved crimes across Ontario, searching for potential links to West. He had evaded capture for over 2 decades and seemingly continued his crimes. He even displayed a sense of twisted pride, keeping stolen jewelry and a gun permit as trophies hidden in his bathroom ceiling. In 2002, just 5 days before his trial, Ronald Glenn West pleaded guilty to the murders of Doreen Morby and Helen Ferguson. However, his motive and the reason for choosing these specific victims remained a mystery. Sentenced to 2 life terms, with a minimum parole eligibility of 10 years, West displayed no remorse throughout the proceedings and left the families without answers. At that time, it was the oldest cold case ever solved in Canadian history. Ronald Glenn West is still suspected in many other unsolved murders across Canada. He frequently moved across different cities, and he is thought to be connected to a few murders in Ottawa and maybe even British Columbia, where he went after the murders in Ontario. As of today, he's still in prison, although we don't know which one for sure. At one point, he was in the Millhaven Institution, which is a maximum security prison near Kingston, Ontario that holds some of Canada's worst criminals. Doreen and Helen, 2 lives stolen, 2 families left shattered. For years, the search of their killer felt like a never-ending nightmare, but thanks to science that never stood still and detectives who never gave up, justice finally arrived.
But Ronald West's capture is just a step. Justice may have arrived for Doreen and Helen, but the fight to uncover the truth in unsolved cases rages on. This chilling story reminds us that the pursuit of justice never sleeps, and for every life stolen, there will be relentless pursuit of the truth. On the morning of December 6, 1973, a young couple engaged in cleanup activities at the McKinney Campground in Washington stumbled upon something they never expected.
I was going to pick it up as trash. And when I got closer, I noticed her buttocks, and it was definitely not a mannequin.
A cold, lifeless body of a young girl bearing violent and grotesque injuries.
Her face was pretty badly, I'm going to say, eroded away, if you will.
Her throat was slit, portions of her clothing, including her pants and underwear, were ripped apart, and both of her breasts had been mutilated. This wasn't just another violation, it was barbaric. What begs the question is who can make someone do something so ruthless, and why? Right after the discovery of the body, the couple rushed to the nearest telephone to alert the authorities. Their panicked call had summoned police from the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, who swiftly responded to the scene. As the officers arrived, they were met with hints that pointed towards a violent homicide. The victim, a young teenager, bore the unmistakable signs of a violent attack. Her throat had been ruthlessly slit, and her clothing bore the marks of a vicious assault. The pockets of her jacket had been cut out, suggesting an intent to conceal or tamper with evidence. Additionally, she was found with only one boot on her feet, with the other boot missing. Signs of decomposition and animal disturbance around the body suggested that the victim may have been murdered elsewhere before being dumped at the campground. But despite the best efforts of the police to gather evidence, the remote location of the crime scene presented challenges. There were no witnesses, footprints, or tire tracks to provide leads, leaving detectives with little to work with in their search for the perpetrator. Now the investigation took a crucial turn when the medical examiner conducted an autopsy on the victim's body. The cause of death was determined to be the deep cut to her throat. Biological material was collected during the autopsy, but due to the lack of advancements in DNA technology, there was no means to test them and use them in court proceedings. In order to identify the victim, police turned to traditional investigative methods. A sketch artist was hired to create an image of the girl, which was distributed to various police stations in the surrounding areas. Flyers featuring photographs of the victim's clothing were also circulated to the public in hopes of generating leads. The breakthrough in the case came when detectives from Seattle contacted the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, noting similarities between the sketch and a missing 14-year-old girl named Catherine Devine. Catherine's family recognized a distinctive feature on the victim's clothing, confirming her identity.
She had a patch that was a dragon, very unique because she'd taken it off another piece of clothing. And I looked at my mom and I said, "Mom, that's Kathy, you need to call the police."
Born on Christmas Day in 1958 to Bill Devine and Sally Ann Devine, Catherine aspired to become a minister and had a passion for caring for animals and people in need. Her mother, Sally Ann Devine, described her as sweet and big-hearted, always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. Sally Ann reported her missing on November 25, 1973, after she failed to arrive at her cousin's house in Portland, where she intended to visit after an argument with her boyfriend. Meanwhile, with dental records confirming Catherine's identity, investigators vowed to do everything in their power to find her killer and bring them to justice. The investigation process moved further with detectives retracing her last known movements. Following public appeals for information about Catherine's last movements, tips poured in from concerned citizens. Sightings of Catherine allegedly getting into a pickup truck were among the most common reports received by detectives. These tips provided crucial leads for investigators. However, the details varied, and despite extensive efforts, the driver of the truck remained elusive. Detectives then shifted their focus to Catherine's former boyfriend and a family friend, considering them as potential suspects. However, thorough investigations cleared both individuals of any suspicion. Now, a significant breakthrough in the case occurred when detectives searched the home of the family friend. They had discovered newspaper clippings about Katherine's death and a knife with animal blood on it. Initially considered a suspect, forensic analysis ultimately ruled out the knife as the murder weapon. Despite this setback, detectives pressed on with their investigation, and so months passed. Leads started to dwindle, and the case seemed to reach a standstill, leaving Katherine's family consumed by anguish and uncertainty. The investigation took a dark turn when similar murders of young women started to occur in the Seattle area around 1973 and 1974, and these cases had a seriously striking resemblance to that of Katherine's death. This sparked the concerns of a potential serial killer around Washington. Detectives soon started to notice another disturbing pattern among the victims. According to witnesses and tips, every victim was last seen entering a vehicle, subjected to physical assault, and then murdered. During the investigation of the streak of murders, the name Ted Bundy had come up as a potential connection.
Ted Bundy was one of America's most notorious serial killers. Over a 4-year period, he brutally murdered and mutilated 30 women.
Now Bundy was a notorious serial killer, known to operate in the same time and location where Katherine was residing. While Bundy had confessed to numerous murders, both before and after his arrest, he straightaway denied any involvement in Katherine's death during an interview with the detectives on January 24, 1989.
Newly discovered DNA from serial killer Ted Bundy is entered into a national database today. Investigators are hoping to genetically link Bundy to unsolved murders involving young women over the past decades.
Also, despite the lack of concrete evidence linking Bundy to the crime, his presence had cast a shadow of suspicion over the investigation, adding another layer of complexity to the case. For nearly 3 decades, Katherine's murder remained unsolved, leaving her family in a state of despair. In 2001, as advancements in DNA technology continued to evolve, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office initiated a final attempt to crack the case of Katherine's murder. This sample collected from Katherine's body nearly 3 decades earlier was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, as a last-ditch effort to identify a potential match. And against all odds, a breakthrough occurred. There was a match. Once the DNA sample was submitted to CODIS, it gave back a result that was incredibly unique and identifiable. The most shocking fact was that the identified suspect was already serving a 48-year sentence for a physical assault committed just 2 years earlier after Katherine's murder in 1975. This suspect was William Cosden Jr., also known as Billy.
The probability of selecting somebody else at random and they're coincidentally also having a matching profile that was found to be shared between William Cosden and the sample was approximately 1 in 71 trillion.
Born in 1947 in Seattle, Washington, Billy had a troubled upbringing, marked by a penchant for trouble and cruelty. From a young age, he displayed troubling behavior, including cruelty towards animals and a fascination with setting fires. His sisters, Karen and Susan, were the primary victims of his cruelty, enduring years of assault and psychological torment. Despite his troubled past, Billy managed to evade serious consequences for his actions. After dropping out of school, Billy joined the U.S. Marine Corps and was deployed to Vietnam. However, upon his return, he continued his pattern of manipulation and abuse, terrorizing his family and preying on vulnerable individuals. He was even sent to a mental institution for rehabilitation for 4 years, but his sickness persisted. Upon his release, he assaulted Karen again, instilling fear in her and leading her to remain silent about his actions. Now, Billy's modus operandi involved using his younger sister Susan as bait to lure unsuspecting victims. Once inside his vehicle, he would drive for a while before stopping, turning up the music to drown out any sounds from the back where Susan was locked in. This would allow him to carry out his horrific acts without interference or detection. During the time of Katherine's disappearance, witnesses reported seeing Billy at the Restover truck stop in Tumwater, a notorious spot for hitchhikers. He was observed wearing clothing that appeared to be stained with blood.
We had 2 tips mailed in anonymously suggesting William Cosden Jr. is who we should look at. It was an anonymous tip, and you'd really never know what to expect, but when there's 2 of them, certainly somebody ought to take some notice, and we did.
Additionally, sources indicated that blood was found inside his truck on the same day as Catherine Devine's murder. Eyewitness accounts further supported the suspicion surrounding Billy, with individuals claiming to have seen Catherine getting into a pickup truck shortly before her tragic death. Furthermore, it was noted that Billy's truck had mysteriously caught fire shortly after news of Catherine's disappearance emerged, adding to the mounting evidence against him. Despite his efforts to evade justice, law enforcement eventually caught up with him. On November 22, 1973, Thanksgiving, Billy used the snowy weather as an excuse to hunt for his victims under the guise of helping stranded motorists. Ultimately, his reign of terror came to an end on July 20, 1977, when he was arrested for kidnapping and assault, leading to a conviction and a 48-year sentence. The DNA match in Catherine Devine's murder case proved crucial evidence linking him to the crime, shedding light on one of the oldest murder cases in Washington state to use DNA evidence. This breakthrough brought closure to Catherine's family and highlighted the importance of advancements in DNA technology in solving cold cases and bringing perpetrators to justice. In addition to the DNA evidence, witness accounts and physical evidence, such as a bloody boot matching Catherine's, had further implicated Billy in the murder. Despite his denials, the overwhelming evidence against him painted a strong picture of his guilt. Despite the passage of time, the pain of Catherine's loss remained deeply felt by her family. The trial gave a bittersweet opportunity for the Devine family to confront Catherine's killer face to face. Sister Charlene described the experience as both devastating and empowering, as they grappled with the reality of Catherine's final moments.
See, that's the hardest thing for me.
And finally, in March 2002, Billy was charged with Catherine's murder. William Cosden Jr.'s connection to Catherine's murder came to light while he was already serving time at McNeil Island Penitentiary for a separate assault conviction dating back to 1976. The Washington Crime Lab managed to link DNA evidence from Catherine's case to Billy, shedding light on the decades-old homicide. Upon this, Billy faced a bail set at $500,000, and his trial was scheduled for May of the same year. During the trial proceedings, evidence against Billy lined up, leading to his conviction for Catherine's murder. Billy's defense team attempted to cast doubt on the significance of the DNA evidence linking him to Catherine's murder. They argued that the mere presence of DNA at the crime scene did not necessarily involve Billy in the homicide.
The DNA evidence may link him to contact with the individual, but it doesn't mean that there's been a homicide and that he's responsible for that homicide.
Despite the defense's efforts to cast doubt on the significance of DNA evidence, the prosecution pointed to Billy as the perpetrator of Catherine's murder.
If you never had any contact with Catherine before, you never seen her before, you never had sex with her or anything else, how did your sperm get in her vagina? And his only response to that was, I haven't killed anyone. It's got to be a mistake.
The DNA evidence, coupled with other circumstantial evidence and witness testimonies, painted a clear picture of his involvement in the crime. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his advanced age, Billy remains incarcerated, serving out his sentence. Lingering questions still remain about the full extent of Billy's crimes and whether he may have other victims. The shadow of uncertainty looms over his past actions, leaving open the possibility that Catherine may have not been his only victim. Sally Ann Devine, Catherine's mother, had experienced a mix of emotions when her daughter's murderer was finally charged and arrested. On one hand, there was a sense of relief that justice was finally being served after years of uncertainty and pain. The arrest brought a glimmer of hope that the truth would come to light and that Catherine's killer would be held accountable for his actions. At the same time, there was a profound sense of vindication for Sally. For decades, she had fought tirelessly to keep Catherine's case alive, never giving up hope that one day the perpetrator would be brought to justice. Despite the tragic end to Catherine's life, her legacy endures through the memories cherished by her family. Catherine's dreams of becoming a minister may have been tragically cut short, but the impact she had on those who knew her continues to reverberate. Her family keeps her memory alive, ensuring that she is never forgotten. In Greeley, Colorado, a 23-year-old medical attendant named Tina Torney Sandoval embarked on a journey of love and marriage with her high school sweetheart, John Sandoval. Little did she know, her life would soon become entangled in a web of mystery and deceit. The ideal couple tied the knot soon after graduation, and their married life seemed like the start of a fairy tale romance. But life took a drastic turn for Tina on the unfortunate day of October 19, 1995. After finishing an overnight shift at the North Colorado Medical Center, Tina told her fellow co-workers and her sister, Susan Torney, that she was planning to meet John after work. She was supposed to call her sister right after the meeting around noon, but the phone call never came in. Distraught, Susan asked her mother to drive by John's house to check on Tina. John's aunt, who was subletting the home's basement at that point, opened the doors for her. John's aunt was quite unsure about the couple's whereabouts, as they hadn't been home for some time. Unable to reach out to either, the distressed family went to the local police station to file a missing persons report. And for the next 22 years, no one would know about the whereabouts of Tina Sandoval.
We had no body, we had no scene, we had no witnesses, we had no confession, we had really nothing. She vanished.
The investigation kept picking at dead ends that would at last lead them to her burial site in 2017. Found under the remains of another body, Tina was buried underneath one of the graves at Sunset Memorial Garden Cemetery. What happened to Tina on the day of October 19th? Where was she for the entirety of 22 years? And the most grave question was, how did she end up in the graveyard in the alley of Greeley? Christina Tina Marie Torney Sandoval was born to Michael and Mary Ellen Torney in Windsor, Colorado, on March 17, 1972. She graduated from Windsor High School, where she lettered in track, volleyball, basketball, and the Knowledge Bowl. Moreover, Tina played the trumpet in the high school band and sang in the choir. She was the second child of her parents' 9 children, and she grew up looking after her siblings. Hence, caring for others came naturally to her, and she earned an associate's degree in nursing at Ames Community College. While studying at the college, Tina met John Sandoval, who was studying to become a radiology technician. She received her BS in nursing from the University of Northern Colorado by working as a licensed practical nurse on weekends at Northern Colorado Medical Center. Tina and John maintained their relationship and married in the Colorado Rocky Mountains on December 31, 1991. The couple exchanged their vows in 1991 at a breathtaking chapel in the Colorado Rockies. John toasted his new bride as the best woman a man could ever ask for. The marriage was straight out of a perfect fairy tale for Tina, but not for long. From the outside, the marriage seemed rather perfect, but there was something sinister lurking in the dark. Tina's marriage started to fall apart as she started to notice changes in John's behavior. The sweet man she met in college was actually a predator who lurked around the neighborhoods of Colorado at night. Tina told a few of her colleagues at the medical center about her estranged husband suffering from a disease known as voyeurism. He allegedly followed ladies at random convenience stores, stalking them for several days. Moreover, John would go out late at night to peek through their windows. Tina even claimed he entered his victims' homes and hid in cupboards and under the beds to get a closer look without being spotted. There were instances where John even stole women's underwear and brought them home as trophies. Thus, the police repeatedly came to the Sandoval residence to question him after receiving complaints. When the officers knocked at the door in the summer of 1995, Tina had enough and filed for divorce. She told her sister Susan that sometimes John would get up in the middle of the night and leave their bed to crawl through the neighbors' backyards to peer into their windows. In another conversation with a friend in nursing, Tina said that it wasn't unusual for John to follow a woman home from the store and then spy on her for days. The crumbling marriage and John's failing career were just enough red flags for Tina to file for divorce and move out a mere 2 years after their marriage. She had decided to get herself an apartment of her own in an effort to start her life again. However, that didn't stop John from approaching her. Tina reported seeing John parked outside her apartment complex for hours. He even had jumped onto the deck of her apartment from the staircase that led up to her front door and was watching her in there and told her everything he saw. Tina's sister Susan had shared in an interview. Tina informed her family how John had once put a gun to his head in a dramatic and drastic effort to save his marriage. She also confided in her doctor about her apprehensions regarding her safety from her estranged husband. Despite the unnerving encounters, Tina, still just 23 years old, was looking forward to starting her new life. She wanted to leave behind her past with John as she started living on her own, though her newly found journey would be cut short sooner than she expected. After finishing an overnight shift at the hospital on October 19, 1995, Tina informed her fellow coworkers and sister about her plans on meeting with John after closing down the chapter of her marriage for good. I told her I was really concerned because of everything he'd been doing about following her and acting up with other women again, Susan said. Tina was supposed to update her sister with a call around noon, but the call never happened. As Susan and her mother started to grow more and more suspicious at the turn of events, they decided to go over to her place to check on her whereabouts. As Susan was still at work, she asked her mother, Mary Torney, to go check on Tina. Mary went down to Tina's apartment and she discovered that she was not there. She immediately rushed to John's home. As her heart grew more and more anxious, John lived with his aunt during this time, and the door was opened by her. She was adamant on not letting her in and told the family that Tina was never there. Mary did take notice of her daughter's jacket left behind at the apartment, but John's aunt asked them to leave, claiming that neither of them were present at the house. As soon as Mary walked out of the apartment, she called in her daughter, Susan, and they immediately informed the local police to inspect the situation. The uncanny turn of events surely raised a lot of questions, but without any evidence, John was out of any suspicion. Detective Keith Olson said, we went into full investigation immediately. The police delved into a full-blown search for Tina. Her apartment showed signs that she had indeed returned from her shift at the hospital based on the fact that her nurse's outfit was there, and the room showed no signs of any struggle. The only thing that was out of place was the fact that her car was nowhere to be seen. This prompted the police to search the area for any signs of Tina or her car. On October 20, 1995 at 3 a.m., police located Tina's car parked merely 4 blocks away from John's home. Through the aid of search dogs, investigators managed to track her scent from her car all the way to John's apartment. With suspicion building and police's familiarity with John's past behavior, it became evident that John was somehow involved in the disappearance of Tina. Investigators sent a plainclothes police officer to sit outside John's house and wait until he came home. The officer radioed detectives at 4:45 a.m. when John finally arrived back home. The detectives quickly jumped into their car and arrived a few minutes later to find John was already in the shower. The investigator presumed it was to wash away any evidence that may have remained. Upon being confronted by the swarm of police, John made an attempt to escape by jumping out of a bedroom window. However, this attempt ended in failure, and he was apprehended using force. Searching through the premises, officers recovered muddy clothes, a pail, rope, a carpenter's level, and a flashlight attached to a lanyard in John's car, along with several of Tina's credit cards inside his residence. The investigators executed a search warrant to find the last transactions being done over Tina's credit cards. There was no activities on the cards for 4 days before her disappearance. When they brought John into the station, the detectives noticed several fresh scratch marks on his face, neck, chest, and shoulder caused by fingernails. During the interrogation, he attempted to destroy evidence by cleaning and biting his fingernails. Despite the strong suspicion, police never found a body, proper crime scene, or any witnesses, and John refused to divulge any information about her disappearance. As a result, the district attorney at the time did not file charges. John was taken into custody in connection with a trespassing charge in another case. The lack of circumstantial evidence held back the investigation of Tina. He consistently denied having anything to do with his wife's disappearance and quickly asked for a lawyer. Despite denying involvement in the disappearance, John pleaded guilty to the trespassing charge against him and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was released in 1999 after serving just over 4 years and moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. For the next 10 years, detectives and Tina's family would continue searching for her. With no leads and no bearing on Tina's location, a judge had decided in December 2001 that there was enough evidence to establish the death of Tina, with the state of Colorado issuing a death certificate in 2002. In 2009, the chilling case of Tina Sandoval was given a second chance after a new district attorney took a look into it. Agreed to take on the case, an arrest warrant was issued for John. Inside John's Las Vegas home, investigators made a strange discovery. John had 2 portraits of Tina, where she was wearing a tiny black dress hanging prominently on the wall. Detective Mike Prill also reported finding more than 100 VHS tapes and 70 mini VHS tapes of John filming women along the Las Vegas Strip. In one disturbing video, Prill stated that John followed a woman to her room and went inside when she failed to lock the door. Inside, as 4 women slept, John filmed the women for 17 minutes before slowly removing the sheets from one woman and allegedly assaulting her, Prill said. John was never charged for any of his activities in Vegas, but he was convicted of first-degree murder in his wife's death based on the disturbing discovery from his Las Vegas home. Even though the investigators had not discovered any new evidence, the prosecution charged John with first-degree murder, and he was arrested on June 18, 2009. He pleaded not guilty, but a jury convicted him and sentenced him to life without parole on August 5, 2010. One of the pivotal witnesses for the prosecution was Jesse Martinez, a cousin of John's. According to reports, he and Tina began a relationship a month before she separated from her husband. Jesse helped convince the jury, alleging John stalked Tina and killed her. John's prior victims and officers investigating those cases also testified against him, leading to the conviction. But the issue was not over, with police still looking for Tina's corpse. In a surprising turn of events, the Colorado Court of Appeals overturned John's guilty verdict on March 17, 2016. According to court documents, there were a few technical snags, and a new trial date was set. The district attorney's office was preparing for a new trial when John decided to divulge the location of Tina's body in exchange for a plea deal.
It felt like you were gambling with the devil. Yeah. Because we know he would only do it in order to gain something.
In return to pleading guilty to lesser charges, John Sandoval led investigators to Tina's body.
Nearly 22 years after Tina's disappearance, on March 22, 2017, he told the police how he had hidden his estranged wife's corpse at Sunset Memorial Garden Cemetery in Greeley.
I hate that he's in our family pictures.
John Sandoval had become a part of the family.
Every holiday that we had a family get together, he was there.
He's also the reason the picture Tina took when she finished nursing school is now on her gravestone.
Tina had been buried all along under the grave of Arthur Hurt, a World War II veteran. Hurt's family gave permission to exhume his body, and they found Tina's remains buried about 2 feet below the grave. As part of the plea deal, John was sentenced to 25 years for second-degree murder, but he refused to tell authorities how his wife died or why he killed her. His next parole hearing is scheduled for 2026, but Tina's family is already working to keep him behind bars.
Absolutely terrifying.
For our family.
For our family, for other women.
Any community that he's going to be in is not safe.
The case of Tina Sandoval stands as one of its own kind. The ruthless act of John and the lack of consciousness to do what he did are traits of a cold-blooded murderer. And to imagine living under the same roof for years seems nothing short of a nightmare. Tina lost her youth to an unfortunate turn of events, something that her family would carry for a lifetime. The tragic death of Tina Tony Sandoval stands as a warning that sometimes the person who we deem to be our own can be the devil in disguise. The law has always been loose on the ends of marriage conflicts, withdrawn from taking any direct action at the cost of poor lives like Tina. Maybe if the local authorities provided better supervision, the murder could have been prevented. But then again, John was living under the shadows in a disguise of a good man to society. Thousands of marriages fall apart every year, and most of those unfortunate tales end up in death. The 23-year-old aspiring nurse had her life cut short before she even got a chance at experiencing it. We wish her family the absolute solace and our condolences, wishing all our viewers to keep an eye over the ones you choose as life partners. In the late 1980s, Virginia was plagued by a string of unspeakable crimes that shook communities to their core. 3 young individuals fell victim to a series of disturbing murders, leaving behind grieving families and unanswered questions that haunted the region for decades. Everything began on September 23, 1987, when the bodies of 29-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards were discovered near the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge in the Isle of Wight County. Both victims had been shot to death. In 1989, the killer struck again, taking the life of 20-year-old Teresa Lynn Howell in Hampton. For decades, the identity of the murderer remained a mystery, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and shattered families. How did these crimes go unsolved for so long? What was the motive? And most importantly, where did the killer vanish? On September 19, 1987, the disappearance of David L. Knobling and Robin Edwards sent shockwaves through their respective families and communities. The pair was last spotted together on September 19th, when Robin left her home to meet with David at an arcade.
I told her that she had to be home by 11, and she called me about 11:15, and let me know that she was home safe.
The alarm was first raised by the Moblings, who noticed David's absence when his little brother Michael revealed that he had last seen David driving off in his truck the previous evening. Concern quickly turned to panic as the Moblings realized that David had not returned home, prompting frantic efforts to locate him. Meanwhile, the Edwards family initially approached Robin's absence with a sense of calm, attributing it to her past behavior of running away. However, as hours turned into days without any word from Robin, their unease grew. Despite Robin's progress in family counseling sessions, her prolonged absence raised suspicions that she may have been taken against her will. With each passing hour, the gravity of the situation became more apparent, prompting both families to contact the Virginia State Police and initiate a search for the missing pair. On September 21, 1987, Virginia streets buzzed with the presence of numerous search parties. Led by Virginia police, these efforts were supported by the participation of both the Mobling and Edwards families. Search groups focused on the last known locations of David and Robin, focusing primarily on Newport News, Hampton, and other surrounding areas. Among those actively engaged in the search was Carl Mobling, David's father, who took to the streets in hopes of finding his son. Despite initial optimism, fueled by the possibility that David may have simply needed time alone, the Mobling family's hopes were dashed when they stumbled upon a troubling discovery during their search efforts. David's black Ford Ranger pickup truck was discovered on December 21, 1987, by a patrolman at the Wildlife Refuge's parking lot. The vehicle was still running, with the driver's side window rolled down, the wipers on, engine and radio all operational, and some pieces of clothing were found inside. Notably, both doors were left open, and the driver's side window was partially rolled down. This led authorities to speculate that the perpetrator may have been posing as a uniformed officer and had access to such a vehicle. Meanwhile, the presence of Mobling's wallet inside the pickup meant that robbery was ruled out as a probable motive. However, while the detectives saw this as progress, the Mobling family felt a sinking dread. They knew David cherished his truck and wouldn't willingly abandon it, but despite their exhaustive efforts, the search parties found no further leads that day. And 4 days later, their bodies were found along the shoreline on the south bank of the James River in Isle of Wight County. Both were not fully dressed. Robin had her jeans unbuttoned and her bra positioned around her neck. Upon examination during the autopsy of David and Robin's bodies, it was revealed that both victims had suffered gunshot wounds. Robin Edwards had been shot in the back of the head in an execution-style manner, while David Mobling had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the shoulder. Initially, investigators were uncertain whether a sexual assault had occurred, particularly considering Edwards' underage status. However, notable evidence emerged during the examination, such as Edwards being found with her jeans unfastened and her bra around her neck. At the crime scene, detectives struggled to piece together the events that led to David and Robin's deaths. Speculation arose about a possible sexual relationship between David and Robin, despite her underage status. This raised questions about potential sexual assault, but conclusive evidence remained elusive, leaving the forensics report unchanged. As the investigation unfolded, detectives noticed striking similarities to another unsolved murder case from over a year ago, the killings of Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. Both cases shared a common location, the Colonial Parkway. This discovery raised suspicions of a potential serial killer operating in the area. Now, the Colonial Parkway was a quiet road winding through Virginia. It became a favorite spot for young couples seeking privacy. But in 1986, it turned into a nightmare when a killer started targeting lovers. Kathleen and Rebecca were the first victims. They were found dead in their car, with their throats slashed. The killer struck again in 1987. This time, probably David and Robin were his victims. Both cases had eerie similarities and happened near the parkway, and this probed the detectives to find a pattern. It was clear, staging the crime scenes and targeting couples. Despite investigations, the killer remained unidentified, leaving families devastated and communities fearful. The Colonial Parkway, once a symbol of romance, became associated with tragedy and fear. With 4 murder investigations ongoing, detectives hoped the disturbing double homicides would be the last in Virginia. Sadly, their hopes were dashed as more bloodshed followed. Less than 7 months after David and Robin's death, another tragic double homicide occurred. This time, it was 18-year-old Cassandra Haley and 20-year-old Richard Keith Call, both students at Christopher Newport University. They vanished after a party, never returning to their classes. Initially, detectives thought that the couple might have drowned in the York River, but no bodies were found despite an extensive search, and still their remains haven't been found. With over 6 people murdered and no answers, residents lived in constant fear. Then again, a horrifying call came to investigators. This time, a construction crew made a grim discovery near their worksite, approximately 5 miles from Hampton. They stumbled upon women's clothing, and an unidentified woman's body was found in the nearby woodland area. The victim was identified as Teresa Linspaugh Howell. Now, Teresa's body was identified from a missing persons report that was filed in York County on July 4, 1989. Further autopsy revealed that Teresa had been assaulted and died as a result of strangulation. Teresa was born on August 25, 1960, in Annapolis, Maryland, to Maldon Pierce Spaugh and the late Betty Elizabeth Jeffrey Spaugh. She was a devoted mother to her 2 children, Elijah and Nicole, who resided in San Antonio, Texas, living alone in the Pines of York Apartments complex on Route 134. Teresa faced the challenges of being unemployed and estranged from her husband. Following the investigation behind Teresa's missing, it was found that on July 1, 1989, she ventured out to a popular spot called the Zodiac Club on East Mercury Boulevard in Hampton, Virginia. Her intention was to have a fun night and put her past behind her. However, her night took a dark turn as she went missing shortly after leaving the nightclub. And tragically, nobody noticed her absence until it was too late. In the early hours of Saturday, the Virginia State Police received a distressing call. A construction worker from the York County reported discovering a trail of women's clothing strewn about, leading him to a woman's body in a wooded area at the 500 block of Butler Farm Road. Authorities promptly responded to the scene, which was part of the developing Hampton Road Center off Magruder Boulevard. It took 3 days to identify the victim, who was confirmed to be Teresa after a missing persons report was filed on July 4, 1989. Investigators swiftly launched an investigation to reconstruct Teresa's final moments. Initial findings revealed that Teresa, 29 years old at the time, was last seen leaving the Zodiac nightclub around 2:30 a.m. While it was too early to declare her missing, over 7 hours passed before the construction worker reported her whereabouts. Her body was found just 4 miles from her apartment complex and 5 miles from the nightclub. Further investigation uncovered disturbing relations with the double homicide of David and Robin, whose body were discovered 15 miles away 2 years earlier. Like Robin Edwards, Teresa had also been sexually assaulted, with strangulation determined as the cause of death. But despite the connections to David and Robin's case, detectives did not classify Teresa's death as part of the Colonial Parkway killings. However, they strongly believed that the same killer was responsible. In the wake of Teresa Howell's murder, Virginia authorities were on high alert, determined to prevent further bloodshed. Yet on September 5, 1989, tragedy struck again as 2 more individuals vanished: 21-year-old Daniel Lauer and 18-year-old Anna Marie Phelps. Daniel's car, a Chevrolet Nova, was discovered abandoned at a westbound rest stop off Interstate 64 in New Kent County. The car was oddly positioned on the acceleration ramp, doors unlocked, and the keys left in the ignition. Anna Marie's purse was found inside, along with Daniel's packed luggage in the back seat. Initially, the detectives considered the possibility of the pair running away, but further investigation quickly threw this notion. The scene had the hallmarks of the Colonial Parkway killer's modus operandi, which staged to appear abandoned with the intent to lure unsuspecting victims. Despite immediate search efforts, the dense forest surrounding the area made locating Daniel and Anna Maria challenging. Even aerial searches proved no results. Weeks passed marked by heavy rain that further complicated the search. Hope waned until, 7 weeks later, a grim discovery was made by turkey hunters: the decomposing bodies of Daniel and Anna Maria, covered with an electric blanket taken from Daniel's car. The bodies were found on a narrow, secluded trail. Anna Maria's locket was recovered nearby. Forensic examination, though hindered by advanced decomposition, revealed multiple stab wounds on Anna Maria's remains. Daniel's cause of death remained inconclusive due to the extent of decomposition. Now you see The similarities to previous Colonial Parkway cases were undeniable. Authorities believed the killer, dubbed the Phantom of Colonial, sought to recreate his past atrocities. Staging Daniel's car echoed the pattern seen with previous victims, serving as a chilling reminder of the killer's taunts. Despite tireless efforts, authorities faced frustration as the elusive killer continued to evade, leaving a trail of bloodshed in his wake. The Phantom of Colonial remained a shadowy figure, outsmarting authorities at every turn. The investigation into the Colonial Parkway murders had hit a dead end. 6 long years had passed, and the killer remained elusive. Some detectives came up with a theory that the killer might be tied to law enforcement, given the staged nature of the victims' vehicles. The partially rolled down driver's window hinted at a possible impersonation of an officer, but efforts to tie the killer to law enforcement proved futile. It seemed the killer had managed to obtain a uniform to facilitate his crimes. Turning their focus to connections between cases, detectives revisited the Teresa Spa Howell murder. Though initially treated as a separate case, similarities to the Colonial Parkway killings were evident. Led by Lieutenant Detective Eddie Watts, investigators explored 2 theories regarding Teresa's death. The first suggested she was killed elsewhere before being dumped at the construction site. The second had the killer stage the crime scene to mislead investigators. Yet without concrete evidence, both theories broke down. Now, as pressure mounted from the Spa family, the investigation changed hands, now led by Detective Edgar Browning. In May 1995, a breakthrough, or so it seemed, occurred with the arrest of Clinton Wayne Edwards. It was totally based on witness statements and DNA evidence. Edwards was charged with capital murder. However, further investigation revealed errors in the DNA evidence, leading to Edwards' release. The embarrassment of Edwards' wrongful arrest marked a setback for authorities. Despite relentless efforts, the case grew cold, with no viable theories to pursue. Now, 7 years had passed, leaving detectives frustrated and families without closure. And in December 2020, FBI Special Agent Brian Dugan took charge of the FBI Norfolk Field Office. Determined to crack the case, Dugan meticulously reviewed evidence and witness statements. Finally, in late 2023, a breakthrough occurred. Dugan had instructed his team to retest DNA samples from the crime scene, despite skepticism from some investigators. To their surprise, a clear match came up. The DNA linked to the double homicide of David Knobling and Robin Edwards also matched samples from Teresa Howell's murder. The discovery reignited hope in solving the cold cases. Further investigation traced the DNA to Alan Wilmer, a man who had died of natural causes in 2017. His DNA, which was entered into the database during his post-mortem examination, resurfaced as a match to the Colonial Parkway murders. With Wilmer's identity revealed, authorities launched an intensive inquiry into his life. After 36 years, the killer had a name. The breakthrough marked a significant milestone in pursuit of justice for the victims and their families. Alan W. Wilmer Sr., the suspected Colonial Park killer, had actually passed away in December 2017 in Lancaster County, Virginia, at the age of 63. His body was not discovered for a month. His death marked the end of a long investigation that implicated him in 3 homicides. Born on November 18, 1954, in Lancaster County, Virginia, Wilmer was known for his solitary nature. He lived alone at his residence on Meyer Creek Road in Lancaster County. Though he had been married once before, the marriage ended in divorce, and he had 2 adult children. Notably, Wilmer drove a distinctive blue 1966 Dodge Fargo pickup truck with the Virginia license plate EMRAW. This truck was just one of several pickups Wilmer owned and operated in the 1980s and early 1990s. Beyond his truck, Wilmer also owned a small commercial fishing boat named the Denny Wade. This 1976 custom-built wooden boat was his vessel for clam and oyster farming, docking primarily at marinas in Gloucester and Middle Essex counties and around the Northern Neck region. He was also an avid hunter and belonged to at least one hunt club in the Middle Peninsula region. Wilmer's livelihood as a fisherman allowed him to spend significant time at sea on his commercial boat. But despite his reserved demeanor, Wilmer led the active lifestyle, frequently engaging in hunting activities and participating in local hunt clubs. However, his reclusive tendencies and his familiarity with the Virginia landscape made him a prime suspect in the Colonial Parkway murders. While Wilmer maintained a clean criminal record, investigations revealed his prior involvement as a suspect in the double homicide case of Cassandra Haley and Richard Call. Witnesses reported seeing him approach the couple along the Colonial Parkway prompting FBI surveillance under Special Agent Irvin B. Wells in 2016. During surveillance following the deaths of Richard and Cassandra, agents observed Alan Wilmer performing suspicious activities, including spray painting and cleaning one of his older trucks. This behavior raised suspicion, prompting agents to obtain a search warrant for his residence. However, the search yielded little incriminating evidence, with only a registered gun, explicit material, and handcuffs discovered. Despite their suspicions, agents lacked substantial evidence to detain Wilmer. Even after interrogations, Wilmer maintained his innocence. To further ascertain his innocence, agents requested that Wilmer undergo a lie detector test, to which he readily agreed. A renowned polygraph specialist conducted the test, ultimately concluding that Wilmer was innocent. Nonetheless, Special Agent Wells remained convinced of Wilmer's involvement in the Colonial Parkway murders, albeit without concrete evidence, resulting in Wilmer's release. Following this encounter, Wilmer faded from law enforcement's radar until his death on December 15, 2017. His inclusion in the DNA database posthumously gave some critical evidence, linking him to 3 of the 9 crime scenes associated with the Parkway murders. On January 8, 2024, the Virginia State Police officially named Wilmer as the prime suspect in the 1987 double homicide case of David Knobling and Robin Edwards. Multiple law enforcement agencies echoed this announcement, revealing Wilmer's involvement in the death and violation of Teresa Spa Howell in 1989. However, due to Wilmer's passing on December 15, 2017, at the age of 63, he could not be prosecuted for his crimes. Even though Wilmer could not face legal consequences, the identification of him as the perpetrator brought closure to the families of the victims.
She missed out on her entire life.
They spoke of the years of uncertainty and fear, acknowledging that Wilmer's demise at least prevented him from harming others. Robin's sister Jeanette Santiago shared a heartfelt interview, empathizing with her sister's ordeal at just 14 years old.
From them, I think about sometimes what kind of mom she would have been. You know, I think about the fact that she doesn't get to have children.
It was just like somebody ripped my heart out.
Now, even though Wilmer was pointed out during all this time, Virginia State Police spokeswoman Ms. Corinne Geller clarified that, despite ongoing efforts, there was currently no physical or forensic evidence linking Wilmer to the other 6 murders.
Recognize there are still other families related to the Colonial Parkway homicide victims who are still hoping for answers. That's why we continue to push forward with our investigations.
The story of Alan Wade Wilmer's connection to the Colonial Parkway murders still leaves many detectives baffled. It shows how tricky it can be for the police to solve such old cold cases with no trails. And maybe it also shows how God's hands play an important role in such cases. Thinking about the lives lost, it wasn't just David Knobling, Robin Edwards, and Teresa Howell. There were many more people who became victims to this madman. Meanwhile, there's still this question: was Wilmer really the one person behind these terrible crimes, or could there be others out there? In the late 1980s, Greenville, South Carolina was in the midst of a transformation, shedding its industrial past to become a thriving center of commerce and culture. But right in the middle of this transformation, a shocking crime in broad daylight rocked the community. On October 8, 1988, 80-year-old socialite Alice Haynsworth Ryan was tragically killed in her fancy Tudor mansion in Greenville shortly after returning from a chemotherapy session. What added salt to the wound was that the case would not be solved until 3 long decades had passed. Who could perpetrate such a despicable act against a vulnerable individual, and what were the factors contributing to the protracted delay in delivering justice? Born into a notable family on January 24, 1908, Alice grew up in a world of privilege and prominence in Greenville. She was the only daughter of her parents, Harry J. Haynsworth and Rhoda Livingston Haynsworth. Alice was also adored by her brother, Knox Livingston Haynsworth, and half-brother, Clement Furman Haynsworth, who came from her father's other marriage. From the moment she entered the world, Alice was destined for a life of luxury and influence. Her father, a successful attorney, had established one of Greenville's most esteemed law firms. By the time Alice was born, the firm already flourished for over a decade. Alice was a spirited young girl who knew her own mind and was accustomed to getting her way. With her captivating beauty and charm, Alice was no stranger to admiration, as men found her gorgeous and enchanting. However, she was primarily dedicated to her studies. In 1929, Greenville welcomed a dashing newcomer named Joseph Murphy Ryan, fondly known as Joe, hailing from Ireland to manage a southern office for his family's textile business. Joe stood out from Alice's usual social circle, being Catholic, wealthy, and notably a Yankee raised in Troy, New York. Their romance blossomed quickly, with friends recalling them as a striking couple. They exchanged vows in a modest ceremony at Alice's parents' home, followed by a lavish 3-week honeymoon in Bermuda. Upon their return, they embarked on the construction of their dream home, a sprawling 5,000-square-foot Tudor mansion nestled on 2 acres of woodland way. This would be her sanctuary for the next half-century before her life was tragically cut short. Alice and Joe's marriage began on a strong note, and their bond only deepened with the arrival of their son, Joe Ryan Jr. It was followed by the births of their 2 daughters, Kathleen and Rhoda, the latter named in homage to Alice's mother. As a wealthy socialite, Alice never held a job. With a cook, maid, and nanny to assist with their children, Alice enjoyed a life of comfort and extravagance. However, everything changed for Alice when her husband Joe sadly passed away from a ruptured appendix in 1950. At 42 years old, with 3 children still young, Alice inherited a paid-off home and assets totaling $1.5 million. Despite the financial security, the loss of her husband took a toll on Alice's happiness. For the ensuing 3 decades, Alice remained in the same house, opting to live alone after her children had moved out. Alice led a life full of contradictions. She could be both flamboyant and formal, enjoying the company of many, but spending her final years in privacy with her beloved Cocker Spaniel Sassy. Her children knew her as independent and fearless, though they often worried about her living alone without a security system. It wasn't until the twilight years of her life that they convinced her to lock the doors of her massive home. But before any of that could make a difference, something else came along. In late 1987, at the age of 79, Alice faced a healthcare scare when pneumonia revealed cancer in her lung. Always private, she kept this news to her intimate family too, but she had to follow a regimen of 8 monthly chemotherapy sessions to battle the disease. While she appeared to be winning the fight, the grueling treatment took its toll on her health. However, little did anyone anticipate that her chance of survival would be abruptly snatched away. That Saturday morning, on October 8, 1988, Alice awoke to the sounds of St. Francis Hospital, eager to return home. She had spent the previous 2 nights in the hospital for chemotherapy, which had been almost unbearable. With just 1 more round left, she hoped to put this chapter behind her. Throughout Alice's illness, her devoted children had established a routine to ensure she received the best possible care. Rhoda took her to the hospital on Thursday, October 6, 1988, and stayed most of the day. Joe Ryan visited his mother that night, but couldn't stay for long due to his commitments to the family textile business. Kathleen was in charge of picking up her mom from the hospital and staying with her at home until Monday morning. Following the plan, Kathleen picked up her mom from the hospital around 1:45 p.m. on October 8, 1988. Once they got back to the Tudor mansion, Kathleen got her mom settled on the sofa in the den, which was the room farthest from the kitchen, so she could watch the Dodgers-Mets game. After a brief telephone conversation with Rhoda around 2:30 p.m., Kathleen decided to grab something for lunch, while Alice said she'd head upstairs to unpack. As the mother-daughter said goodbye to each other, none of them would realize that it would be their final farewell. After being away from home for just 40 minutes, just enough time to grab some hot dogs, onion rings, apple, muffins, and dog food, around 3:10 p.m., Kathleen pulled into her mother's driveway. As she approached the back door, she immediately noticed that the pane closest to the doorknob was shattered. Kathleen also found it odd that Sassy, her mother's faithful canine companion, didn't come running to greet her. As she stepped into the kitchen, Kathleen encountered a scene that would haunt her forever. There, on the floor against the peeling radiator, lay her mother, Alice, motionless. Her right arm draped awkwardly across her body, and nearby scattered belongings told a grim tale. Black flats lay discarded, a gold rope necklace strewn beside her, while 2 diamond rings remained untouched on her fingers. Alice's silk turban, now stained with blood, lay several feet away, exposing her bare head. Her brown trousers were intact, but her pink turtleneck and brown sweater had been pushed up, revealing darkened wounds on her abdomen. A chilling sight that no daughter should ever have to witness. Terrified and panicked, Kathleen dashed outside to seek help. She first hurried through the backyard to a house on McDaniel Avenue, but found no cars parked outside. She then turned to the neighboring house, but again there was no sign of anyone. With desperation mounting, she raced down the sloping front lawn and managed to flag down a passing white Jeep. The driver, Raymond Schroeder, urged Catherine not to return to the house, fearing that the assailant might still be inside. He suggested she get into his vehicle so they could find a phone, but Catherine refused and instead headed towards another neighbor's house. Meanwhile, Raymond sped off to the 8 o'clock Superette, a local grocery store, and made a call to 911 at 3:19 p.m. Just 2 minutes later, at 3:21 p.m., Catherine placed her own call to 911 from a house on McDaniel Avenue. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Greenville police arrived at the crime scene and swiftly cordoned off the area with yellow crime scene tape, initiating a meticulous inspection of the premises. Inside the house, apart from 2 open drawers, one in the kitchen containing knives and the other in a living room end table, nothing seemed disturbed. Forensic specialists promptly determined that Alice had succumbed to stab wounds. Word of the crime spread rapidly, shocking the community. Although murder wasn't unheard of in some of Greenville's neighborhoods, this type of merciless murder was unprecedented. Joe and Rhoda rushed to the scene, desperate to comprehend the incomprehensible. As people from the community gathered outside the house, there was mass confusion, with many coming and going, taking pictures and asking questions. These questions mirrored those swirling in the minds of the investigators. Who could perpetrate such a heinous act? What motive lurked behind this heinous crime? And if robbery was the culprit's intent, why resort to such a crude method as hurling a rock through a window? It seemed amateurish, not the work of a seasoned burglar. Almost immediately, suspicions pointed to a seemingly disturbed man who had mysteriously taken up residence in Alice's pool house several months prior. The peculiar encounter began in July 1988, when Grace Gordon, Allison's maid of 40 years, decided to tidy up the pool house while Alice was receiving treatment at St. Francis Hospital. Pushing her way through the bushes, Grace opened the unlocked door to find a man inside, singing to himself. When Grace asked him who he was, the 27-year-old robust man identified himself as Billy. Startled, Grace hurried to inform Rhoda, Alice's daughter. But by the time Rhoda and the police arrived, Billy had vanished. About 2 months later, Grace spotted the same man in the backyard heading towards the pool house. She immediately called Joe, Alice's son. Joe was shocked to find furniture rearranged, frozen chicken thawing on the counter, and a pack of Kools lying on a table. Ashes were scattered in the fireplace. Joe decided to wait, and roughly 30 minutes later, Billy returned carrying a stereo and 2 speakers. The police were summoned once again. They seized his belongings, including his stereo and clothes. However, since he had only gained entry by tampering with the lock, the judge could only issue a trespass notice. A few days later, Billy returned to retrieve his belongings. Grace left him waiting on the porch. When Alice came downstairs, she found him inside the living room, playing her piano. Despite Alice being just 5 feet 2 inches tall, she stood her ground against the 6 foot 1 inch man. Grace remembered Alice escorting him to the door, cautioning him to stay away. However, a mere 12 days later, when Alice was murdered, the children expressed concern that their mother, who feared nothing and possessed a sharp tongue, may have provoked the rage of a disturbed individual. Police promptly apprehended Billy at his residence later that afternoon, only to be met with disappointment when Woodside Mill neighbors confirmed having seen him throughout the afternoon. To further unravel the mystery of the murder, the police enlisted Joe and Catherine's help in identifying any missing items. Although they couldn't immediately spot anything amiss, it soon became evident that Alice's 1967 Ford Fairlane was gone from the scene. They didn't have to wait long before the car was located. At 4:30 p.m., a resident of Fernwood Lane, a narrow winding road nearby, alerted the police. The car had been blocking the street since 3:55 p.m. For lead detective Dave Henderson, the location seemed ideal for abandoning a stolen vehicle. A nearby telephone pole equipped with steps could have provided the perpetrator with a means to climb over a wooden fence and into the neighboring Nicholtown area. Despite passing numerous houses and leaving the car in the middle of a well-populated street less than a mile from Alice's residence, no residents witnessed the driver. Alice's house key was discovered beside the car, but the car key was nowhere to be found. The murder weapon, a flathead screwdriver with a black and yellow handle, was discovered in a ravine near where the car had been abandoned. Unfortunately, the screwdriver didn't yield any fingerprints. Additionally, a blood-stained dish towel with orange and white stripes traced back to Alice's pantry was also found. However, apart from these items, little physical evidence was recovered from the scene or the car. The autopsy report provided chilling details. There were no signs of defensive wounds, hair or skin under Alice's fingernails. Weakened by chemotherapy, the frail woman couldn't put up a fight. She succumbed to 4 knife wounds to her back and abdomen, but a total of 33 stab wounds covered her body. It was a sheer act of cruelty. Deputy Coroner Park Evans labeled it as overkill, suggesting that the attacker acted in a fit of rage, driven by intense emotions. As the details of the murder spread, neighbors became increasingly anxious. Many installed burglar alarms, kept an eye out for strangers, and ensured their doors were securely locked. During the police investigation, a key witness emerged. A 16-year-old girl who lived half a mile from Alice's house. She reported seeing a white car speeding backward down Alice's driveway around the time of the murder. Remarkably, she recognized the car in police custody as the same one she had nearly collided with. While she couldn't provide a detailed description of the driver, she recalled that they had dark hair. Dozens of patrolmen, detectives, and SLED agents spread out across Greenville to speak with the various workmen Alice had hired in the past. Detectives also conducted interviews with neighbors and their household employees. Despite their efforts, the interviews initially yielded no useful information. However, when officers visited Cleveland Park Stables, a woman who gave riding lessons reported seeing Alice's Ford sedan at 2:45 p.m. on the fateful Saturday, startling her horse. Although she couldn't make out who the driver was, she was certain of the time. Unfortunately, even this lead failed to produce any concrete results. It appeared as though the murderer had simply vanished without a trace. With no clues to move further, detectives decided to revisit the old evidence with a fresh look. Since the autopsy revealed knife wounds, detectives Forrest Bush Banton and Paul Stombaugh returned to the ravine where the screwdriver was discovered. By a stroke of luck, they found a 13-inch butcher knife blade up. It had been wiped off as cleanly as the screwdriver. They scoured the woods with a metal detector, looking for Alice's car key. Again, no luck. Frustrated by the lack of progress, detectives decided to make the investigation public by taping a Crime Stopper segment, hoping to generate leads. However, the segment barely produced any useful tips. Meanwhile, investigators meticulously reviewed the evidence, but most fingerprints were smudged or belonged to individuals known to the family. However, they did find one clear palm print on a wall that didn't match anyone associated with the household. Police believed that identifying the owner of this print could be crucial to securing a conviction. In addition, detectives searched through records of known burglars and submitted fingerprints to the FBI to develop a psychological profile of the killer. Then, in a potential breakthrough, officers in Anderson, South Carolina, arrested 2 men believed to be connected with the murder of Albert L. Mutt Osteen, a 77-year-old man who had been stabbed with both a knife and a screwdriver in his upscale home. The similarities between this case and Alice's murder raised hopes that they might have found a solid lead. Since the crime almost mimicked Alice Ryan's murder, detectives thought that they had their man. As it turned out, they were yet again pursuing the wrong lead. The men had been at work when Alice was killed, their supervisor told authorities. 8 days after the murder, a man told detectives his 8-year-old daughter had found a Ford key lying in plain sight on Fernwood Lane. Detective Henderson thought his officers might have missed the key, which turned out to be Alice's, but his gut instinct told him the killer returned and threw the key out. Then, the FBI provided its psychological profile, suggesting that the killer was a man familiar with the neighborhood who may have observed Catherine leaving and decided to burglarize the house. According to the FBI's assessment, Alice likely attempted to defend herself with a butcher knife. In a panicked and enraged state, the assailant then resorted to using a screwdriver to stab her before grabbing the knife and stabbing her again. However, detectives stated that the report did not significantly advance the investigation. By December of 1988, with 3 other unsolved murders adding to the city's woes, the Greenville police chief established a 10-member homicide task force. Around the same time, Detective Henderson received information from Nicholton residents indicating that 2 men were seen driving Alice's car on the day of her death. The residents described the car as having black electrical tape on the side, which matched the description of Alice's missing vehicle. Moreover, the car was unaccounted for an hour during that afternoon. According to residents, one of the men was someone Detective Henderson was familiar with. This individual had previously managed to evade arrest by Henderson's efforts when he jumped from a second-floor window while being pursued for robbing a shoe store. However, before investigators could apprehend the second man, he had already passed away. This development marked the third instance where investigators believed they were on the verge of solving the case, only to have the conclusion slip away once again. Months later, the family faced another loss. Sassy, Alice's faithful companion, who endured shallow stab wounds during the attack, was taken in by a police officer. However, 6 months later, suffering from blindness and kidney failure, she was euthanized. The investigation, one of the most extensive in Greenville's history, involved numerous officers from Greenville Police Department and a handful of agents from the State Law Enforcement Division. Nearly 300 individuals were interviewed regarding the 1988 murder, with around 60 considered as potential suspects. Despite these efforts, the trail remained cold, leaving investigators empty-handed and the case unresolved. They packed 2 large cardboard boxes with incident reports, tape recordings, interview notes, and crime scene photos. The significance of Alice Ryan's identity as a scion of one of Greenville's most prominent legal families was not lost on them. Alice's family also made a public decision to offer a $10,000 reward to anyone who could provide information leading to the identification of the killer or aiding the case. Despite the extensive scale of the investigation and the multitude of leads pursued, every avenue explored seemed to lead to a dead end. While the investigation remained open, it had come to a standstill. As months turned into years, the murder became the Greenville Police Department's most frustrating case, eventually growing cold for nearly 3 decades. In the aftermath of Alice Ryan's tragic death, each of her children coped with the loss in their own way. Joe Ryan, then 53, took on the role of a reserve police officer. Although he officially wasn't involved in his mother's case, he stayed connected with the investigators, asking questions and offering support wherever he could. Catherine Stribling, then 51, grappled with the feelings of guilt, wondering if things could have been different if she acted differently, like leaving out a screwdriver that might have been used as the murder weapon. She also carried the weight of regret for running to get help when she discovered her mother's body. Meanwhile, Rhoda Prophet, then 48, had to deal with her own demons. She became a stoic presence amidst the swirling rumors that circulated in Greenville at the time. Throughout it all, they yearned for justice for their mother and sought a path to healing from the profound tragedy. However, it would be many years before any breakthrough emerged, offering a glimmer of hope in a case veiled in mystery for so long. The formation of the Cold Case Unit in 2017 marked a turning point in Greenville's unsolved homicides, including Alice Haynsworth Ryan's case. The unit comprised 2 retired local officers and a former FBI agent who volunteered their expertise.
Police officers say this is a calling, not a job, and even when you retire, it's still a calling. And so these guys have volunteered their time just so they can give some closure to the victims' families of these cases.
With renewed determination, the investigators revisited the evidence, leveraging modern technology and fresh perspectives. In April 2017, DNA extracted from a cigarette butt found in Ryan's recovered vehicle was sent to the State Law Enforcement Division by the Cold Case Unit. From there, a DNA profile was obtained and uploaded into the FBI's CODES database for potential matches. This pivotal piece of evidence, preserved over the years, finally had the chance to yield results thanks to advancements in forensic science. In late 2017, a breakthrough occurred when a match was found with a registered sex offender residing in Americus, Georgia. Officers conducted interviews with the individual, identified as 51-year-old Brian Keith Munns. In December 2017, they obtained saliva samples through a search warrant to confirm the DNA match. Upon confirmation in February 2019, investigators proceeded with criminal charges against Munns. On February 15, 2019, Munns was apprehended in Georgia and later extradited to Greenville to face charges of possession of a stolen vehicle and accessory after the fact to murder. However, the arrest was kept under wraps as the investigation continued. Investigators chose not to publicize the arrest to maintain the integrity of the ongoing investigation, allowing them to corroborate statements provided by witnesses and informants. Following the arrest, cold case detectives conducted over 30 interviews. Those interviews provided detailed information about Alice's death, enabling investigators to file additional charges against Munns. On May 6, 2019, the Greenville Police Chief Ken Miller went public with this news.
I'm pleased to announce that we have made an arrest of the suspect in the murder of 80-year-old Alice Haynsworth Ryan in her Cleveland Park home on Woodland Way nearly 31 years ago.
The charges brought against him on February 2019 were dismissed on May 16, 2019. Subsequently, on the same day, detectives filed new charges against him, including murder, burglary, armed robbery, and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Checking into Munn's background, detectives discovered that his family history was pretty much a mystery. Born in 1968, he attended America's High School in Sumter County and pursued studies at Charlotte Diesel Driving School. For the majority of his life, he worked as a truck driver. However, his criminal record revealed a troubling history. Munn had been in trouble with the law in South Carolina since the early 90s. In 1991, he was convicted of larceny and strong-arm robbery in Colombia. Later, in 1998, Munn faced charges of first-degree criminal conduct. He ultimately pleaded guilty in 2001, leading to a period of incarceration until May 2007. Despite being released on probation afterward, Munn found himself back in prison in August 2008 after his community supervision was revoked. He was released on probation again in May 2009, only to have his freedom short-lived as he violated the terms of his release by failing to register as a offender. Consequently, his community supervision was revoked once more in July 2009. Munn completed his sentence and was released in October 2009. Although Munn likely did not know Alice, he resided near Fernwood Lane, less than a mile away from Ryan's home at the time of her killing in 1988. However, the case had yet another twist. The investigation led police to another man, Lamar Green, who was seen with Munn on the day Alice was killed. Green was the same individual who was a known burglar back in 1988 and had been a suspect from the early days of the investigation, but died a few months after Alice's murder, before police could confirm him as the killer. However, with a long history of involvement with the law, Munn had his way of keeping his mouth shut. Even after being booked and charged, he maintained his silence on the advice of his counsel. It wasn't until he dismissed his first lawyer that things changed. As local prosecutors geared up for the trial and were on the brink of proceeding, Munn heeded his new lawyer's advice and decided to tell authorities his side of the story. He confessed to being in the car with Green on the day in question, claiming the killer was attempting to sell it to him. However, Munn adamantly asserted that he never stepped foot in the Ryan mansion. According to Munn, Green was the one with blood on his hands. Surprisingly, the police believed his account. Deputy Solicitor William McCaster said, based on the evidence, "We felt this all made sense." In September 2021, Munn entered a guilty plea for misprision of a felony, acknowledging his failure to report the crime he had kept concealed for decades. As part of the plea deal, the other charges against him were dropped. Brian Munn received a 4-year sentence in state prison, but was released with credit for time served. For Alice Haynsworth, Ryan's children, Munn's plea brought a sense of closure to a long-standing chapter of pain and uncertainty.
We're just all very pleased and blessed.
Joe Jr. expressed gratitude to the investigators, who never quit looking for his mother's killer.
Thank you all for everybody that is involved in this thing. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Though the scars of the past remain, the resolution marks a solemn chapter's end and a step towards healing for the family.
It was a double murder that brought two kinds of pain for the families left behind. For 23 years, John Van Cuylenborg has been haunted by the murders of his sister Tanya and her boyfriend Jay Cook.
Hailing from Victoria in British Columbia, Canada, 20-year-old Jay and 18-year-old Tanya were a young couple, vibrant with love and curiosity. In November 1987, they embarked on a simple getaway and had planned to return the day after. But what had begun as a journey of love and joy descended into a nightmare of unimaginable horror. Tanya and Jay never returned home and were reported missing. Almost a week after, when Tanya's body was found in the most chilling condition, the mystery behind her tragic fate started to unravel. And while Tanya had been found, there were still no signs of Jay. Who could commit such a heinous act? Could Jay have done this and then fled to somewhere else unknown? If not, where was he? And who was the monster behind Tanya's merciless murder? Tanya Van Cuylenborg, or Sweetie as her loved ones called her, was born on March 7, 1969, to the couple Jean Lorraine and Willem Van Cuylenborg. Tanya and her older brother, John, grew up in their hometown, Victoria in British Columbia, Canada, and had a childhood full of love and affection. Growing up, Tanya's loving companion was her family dog, Tessa. a golden retriever, and it was because of Tessa that Tanya had an affection towards animals and wanted to do something for their well-being. And so by 1987, after graduating high school, Tanya had been thinking about becoming a vet. By this time, Tanya had also met her boyfriend, J. Roland Cook, who was a senior at her school. Jay was born on December 16, 1966, to the couple Leona and Gordon. And just like Tanya, Jay too grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, with his sister Laura. He was a quiet and calm kind of person who was often mistaken to be shy. By November 1987, 20-year-old Jay and 18-year-old Tanya had been together for about 6 months. For Jay's mother, Leona, the happiness on Jay's face when he was around Tanya was enough to tell her that Tanya was special to him. For Tanya's father, William, Tanya's happiness was the only thing that mattered to him. Sadly, neither of the happy families were aware of the tragedy that was about to strike. On Wednesday, November 18, 1987, Jay and Tanya had planned to run an errand for Jay's father, Gordon. However, it wasn't going to be a quick task. Gordon ran a business and needed some furnace parts which were to be picked up from Seattle, Washington State, USA. Seeing this as an opportunity to have the first trip with his girlfriend and spend more time with her, Jay asked Tanya to join him. Tanya was equally excited. She had recently picked up an interest in photography and had bought herself a camera. She grabbed her camera and tagged along with Jay. She wanted to capture all the beautiful moments of the romantic getaway. A little past noon on the same day, November 18, 1987, Tanya and Jay left in Jay's father's bronze 1977 Ford Club van. Their plan was to take a ferry from Victoria, British Columbia to Washington State, drive to the store in Seattle and pick up the parts Jay's father had asked him to collect. Since it would be a time-consuming journey, Jay and Tanya had planned to spend the night in Seattle before heading home the next day. On Thursday, November 19, 1987, Tanya and Jay's families waited for their return. They were expected to arrive around noon that day. But when it was way past that time and there were no signs of the young couple, fear started to creep in. Even though Tanya and Jay were young, they were quite responsible. It was unlike them not to call and inform if they had a change of plans or if they were going to be late. Tanya's mother, Jean, sensed that something was definitely wrong. And while Tanya's father felt the same, he tried to calm her down and reassure her that everything would be okay. But sadly, as the sun inched closer to the horizon on the evening of November 19, 1987, and with the couple not returning home, both the families reached out to the Victoria Police Department to report them missing. John, Tanya's brother, was at college when he got the news that his sister had gone missing. He rushed back to his home to help his family look for Tanya and Jay. Detectives from the British Columbia Police Department took up the case of the missing couple, and with the help of the Washington State Police Department, they were able to track down Tanya and Jay's movements from the day they left for their trip across the border. According to the detectives, Tanya and Jay took the 4 p.m. car ferry from Victoria. It was a 90-minute journey, and the young couple exited the ferry by 5:30 p.m. at Port Angeles, Washington State. Detectives were even able to gather witnesses who said that they had seen Tanya and Jay heading south on Highway 101. They were spotted in the Washington town of Hoodsport around 8 p.m., and then once again in the town of Allen about an hour later. Detectives believed that Tanya and Jay were headed to Bremerton to get another ferry, which left at 10:20 p.m. and took them to Seattle. And after arriving in Seattle, they planned to park the van near the Kingdom and spend the night there. Sadly, from this point onward, there were no further traces of Tanya and Jay. Days went by, but there were no signs of Tanya and Jay. But then on Wednesday, November 24, 1987, everyone's worst fears came true. About 80 miles from Seattle, a partially clothed body of a woman was discovered in a ditch next to the isolated Parsons Creek Road, near the towns of Algier and Burlington, Skagit County in Washington State.
When we got out, we stopped alongside the road. There was a uniformed deputy already down just below the body, where the body was. I went down to examine the body and see what was there. I saw a half-clothed female.
Although the detectives were sure that it was Tanya, they called in her brother John, who confirmed and identified the body as Tanya's.
You know, very difficult time. You're hoping that it's not Tanya, but, you know, this may well be the answer. But we're very quiet. There wasn't a lot to be said between the four of us. We got to Cedar Woolley, and my dad and I together identified Tanya's body.
The condition of Tanya's body told a gruesome story. It was evident that she had to go through extreme horrors in her final moments. She wasn't wearing any pants or any underwear, and her bra had been pushed up to her shoulders to reveal her breasts. Tanya had been and then shot in the back of her head at close range with a .38 caliber gun. There were traces of a foreign bodily fluid found on Tanya's body. Additionally, detectives found some plastic zip ties lying alongside the road close to the body. Detectives believed that the zip ties had been used to secure her in the van and bring her to the location of the crime. Detectives told both the families that there was a chance that Jay carried out the heinous and murder to later flee from the area. They told them to be prepared for this bitter possibility, as Jay was now a suspect in Tanya's murder. However, neither Jay's family nor Tanya's family believed that Jay would do such a thing. Just the next day, on November 25, 1987, detectives found Jay's van near a bus station in the city of Bellingham, 14 miles away from the location where Tanya's body was found.
The van was seized and then it was examined by forensic people.
Well, once it's brought in, it's photographed completely all the way around, every square inch of it. The license plates are photographed for identification purposes on that vehicle. Once that's all done, the doors were opened and we examined anything we could find inside the van.
Upon searching the van, they found a Bremerton Seattle ferry ticket, some more zip ties, a pair of black pants which belonged to Tanya, and a comforter with bloodstains all over it. There were more traces of a foreign bodily fluid found on Tanya's pants and also on the zip ties discovered in the van. Additionally, detectives also found a palm print on the back door of the van. At that point, the detectives were not certain whether Jay had actually committed the crime or if there was someone else involved. However, given the evidence at hand, the detectives became more fearful that Jay had also been a victim of foul play. Later that same day, on November 25, 1987, investigators found more zip ties under the porch of a tavern, which was only 2 blocks away from the van. In addition to that, they found keys to Jay's van, Tanya's driver's license, and wallet, and a half-empty box of ammunition. And not so surprisingly, the ammunition inside the box was a match to the bullet that killed Tanya. Amid the pile of this new evidence, detectives also found a pair of plastic surgical gloves. Detectives believed that the killer had intentionally left them behind as a calling card for the police. The killer wanted the detectives to know that since he was wearing gloves, he did not leave any fingerprints behind, and the detectives needn't look for it. The killer's confidence of having nothing left behind at the crime scene that would connect him to the case seemed like a taunt to the detectives. Jay's family's hopes of finding him alive were hanging by a thread, but that too came down crashing on Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1987. Jay's body was discovered underneath High Bridge off Crescent Lake Road near Monroe, Washington. It was about 70 miles away from where Tanya's body was found. Jay's body had been covered with a blue blanket, only to conceal the cruelty that he had gone through prior to his death. Jay had been beaten with rocks, as well as strangled to death with twine and 2 red dog collars.
The medical examiner came to the conclusion that Jay died from asphyxiation, both from the ligature that was around his neck, but also the fact that the tissue in the cigarette pack had pushed his tongue to the back of his throat. Jay had suffered, unfortunately. The wounds that he had and the way that he had been killed is not something that happens fast. He was still trying to breathe. He was still trying to fight back as he was being suffocated or asphyxiated.
His hands had been bound with zip ties. Some tissues and a pack of cigarettes had been stuffed in his mouth. Looking at the evidence discovered with Jay's body and the gruesome condition his body was in, detectives believed that the way Jay had been murdered was similar to the abuse they had seen before behind prison walls. The efforts the killer had made to conceal Jay's identity were indicative of someone familiar with police procedures. This led the detectives to believe that whoever killed Jay might have spent time in the prison system before. And surprisingly, Jay's body had been found near the Monroe Honor Farm, a men's prison which was the second largest in the state.
Certain things would have made it a serial killer type of a situation. Jay's body was found close to the Honor Farm, which was run by the inmates that were in the prison in Monroe.
detectives wondered whether it was a clue or a mere coincidence. Determined not to leave any stones unturned, they decided to investigate the prison theory. However, it was another dead end in the search for the killer. As the investigation pressed forward with full force, it was time for Jay and Tanya's loved ones to say their final goodbyes. A funeral service was organized for Tanya, and she was laid to rest in the Ross Bay Cemetery, Victoria, in British Columbia. Soon after that, a cremation for Jay took place and his remains were scattered at Fulford Harbor in Salt Spring Island. Even though the identity of Tanya and Jay's killer remained a mystery, the detectives had enough evidence to figure out what must have happened on the night of November 18, 1987, when Tanya and Jay arrived in Washington State. Detectives believed that there was a good chance that Tanya and Jay most likely caught the attention of their killer on the 10:20 p.m. ferry from Bremerton to Seattle. Seeing that Tanya and Jay were a friendly, young couple traveling alone, the killer must have thought of them as easy targets. The killer probably made his first contact with the couple at the ferry's lounge and got acquainted with them, probably after giving them a false introduction. Unaware of his real intentions, Tanya and Jay might have indulged in a friendly conversation with the killer. Detectives believe that the killer might have asked Tanya and Jay for a ride across the Puget Sound. By the time they exited the ferry in downtown Seattle, they were already in the company of the killer. Taking advantage of Tanya and Jay's innocence, the killer fooled them into giving him a ride, and once he led them to an isolated spot, he put his plan into action. The killer had his eyes set on Tanya since he first saw her in the ferry. He wanted to assault her, but Jay was in the way. Detectives believe that he killed Jay first, then took Tanya to another spot where he assaulted and killed her. Then he dumped the van and got rid of the evidence. Since items such as zip ties, a gun, gloves, and other tools had been used in the crime, detectives were sure that whoever killed Tanya and Jay came prepared with a kill kit. He was out to do harm and was only looking for prey. Detectives also believe that the killer was familiar with the area in Washington where the bodies and van were found. Additionally, looking at the way he killed Tanya and Jay, detectives believe that the killer had most likely committed similar crimes in the past. He seemed quite experienced and knew what he was doing. Fearing this, the detectives grew worried that he would continue to commit such crimes until he was caught. He had been successfully evading justice, and as long as he remained free, he could be a danger to society. There's an old saying among detectives that a killer makes at least one mistake, and although the killer seemed confident that he left behind nothing that would get him caught, he was wrong. The day Jay and Tanya left for the romantic trip, Jay had been wearing a waist-length black ski jacket with red piping on the sleeves. That jacket was never recovered at any of the crime scenes. Additionally, Tanya's olive drab day pack and her Minolta 35mm camera with the serial number 2067048 were also never found. Hence, the detectives believed that the killer might have taken all these items, which could help them track him. Detectives circulated information about the missing items in Washington State and hoped that someone would see him with these incriminating items and inform the authorities. Sadly, no such sightings were ever reported. Detectives also looked into the possibility that the murders were connected to those of several other couples in the area, but that too led them to a dead end. While the detectives were busy investigating the double homicide, every single day was a painful one for the families of Jay and Tanya, dealing with the grief of losing their loved ones who had their whole lives ahead of them. Just as both families were trying to put the tragic incidents to the past and move on, someone did something unthinkable, adding insult to injury. Just 2 weeks after Tanya and Jay's murders took place, their family started to receive some threatening letters and morbid greeting cards during the first week of December 1987. The frequency of these incoming letters increased around the Christmas holidays. The letters gave a taunting description of the murders, and the author took full responsibility for them. Rubbing salt into their wounds, the author also wrote to the families that he harbored deep hatred for Canadians and said that the opportunity to kill Tanya and Jay was too good to pass up. Additionally, he threatened the detectives that he would kill again and bragged that he would never get caught. Over the next year, Tanya and Jay's families received many letters, 19 of which had been mailed over 3 different holidays, and as usual, all the letters used anti-Canadian phrases and more hurtful language. The first 2 letters arrived on December 3, 1987, and were postmarked in Seattle. About a dozen more came in every single month for a year. the writer sent Hallmark greeting cards with pictures of teddy bears and kittens for Father's Day, Mother's Day, and Christmas. He also sent letters to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and a British Columbia newspaper. And in all the letters, the author claimed responsibility for the murders. All of the cards and letters were written by the same person and were sometimes signed Tanya or Jay. Even though the detectives pointed out that the letters were postmarked from New York, Los Angeles, and Seattle, the author's identity and address remained a complete puzzle. Nonetheless, detectives remained hopeful to find out who was behind these tormenting greeting cards. However, detectives did find some odd details in those letters which were noteworthy. The handwriting on the cards was very distinctive. The author also made use of some very specific phrases over and over again. Phrases such as "Hallelujah, Bloody Jesus" and "Greetings and Salutations" seemed to be the author's favorite. As of then, police did not find anything in the cards that would definitively prove that the author of those letters was the killer. In regard to that, the letters didn't mention any details that had already been released to the public. Detectives believe that in case the author wasn't the killer, he might have still have been involved in the crime and may have something to do with Tanya and Jay. And even though the detectives were on his tail, he continued to make life miserable for Jay's and Tanya's families. Examining the letters did help the detectives narrow down their list of suspects. There was also a possibility that the writer was Canadian. This suspicion emerged from the fact that the letters used some specific grammar and punctuation, which indicated that the author was educated in Canada. Despite these observations, there was a significant lack of evidence in this case. They only hoped that the killer might have opened up about his crime to someone, and that someday, those people would come forward and help the detectives identify him. 3 years after Tanya and Jay's murder, there was a small development in the case, which made the detectives feel that they were inching closer to nabbing the killer. In 1990, detectives were able to locate the camera lens that belonged to Tanya's missing camera at a pawn shop in Portland, Oregon. However, the lens had been transferred to this pawn shop from another one, and sadly, that shop did not have records from the time it was originally brought in. As a result, detectives were unable to figure out who originally brought the lens. Looking at the extremely slow progress in the case and hoping to gather more information, Tanya's family offered a $50,000 reward for anyone who could give any information that would lead to the arrest of the killer. Detectives did receive a few tips, but sadly, none of them led anywhere. Samples of DNA from Tanya's body and pants, zip ties, and the threatening letters were preserved for future reference. And with no new developments or potential suspects in the investigation, the case of Tanya and Jay's gruesome murder joined the pile of many other cold cases. In 1995, Detective Jim Scharf from Snohomish County put together a cold case team consisting of some top-tier detectives, and the case of Tanya and Jay's murders caught their attention. Reviewing the gruesome and merciless nature of the crime, Tanya and Jay's case became one of the team's first cases. This new team of detectives started going through the case files and re-examined all the evidence that had been collected during the time of the original investigation. Over the next few years, detectives arrived on multiple theories, followed many leads, and even questioned several potential suspects. But none of these efforts worked out in their favor.
Detective Scharf was chasing those leads down day by day, the pit bull that he is. It took a lot of Detective Scharf's time to track down those leads, only to find that that wasn't the person.
According to Detective Scharf, more than 200 names came across his desk, and some of them were convicted felons, but none of them could be linked to Tanya and Jay's murder. There were no further developments in the case until 2003. With DNA technology making progress every day, detectives thought of giving it a shot. A DNA sample from the bodily fluids found on Tanya, her pants, and the zip ties was examined, and the suspect's DNA profile was developed. The Washington State Patrol named it Individual A's profile and uploaded it to CODES, the FBI's national database for DNA profiles of offenders. However, the DNA profile did not match anyone. Serial killers such as Robert Yates and Charles Sinclair, who were active in the Seattle area in 1987, were questioned as well. But the DNA evidence from the crime scene cleared them of any involvement. And yet again, there was a halt in the investigation. About 7 years later, in August 2010, Scientists at the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab in Marysville informed the detectives that they were able to collect DNA samples, which were found on the threatening letters Tanya and Jay's families received almost 23 years ago. Later, when these samples were tested, the scientists made a shocking discovery. The DNA samples found on the letters were not a match to the samples found on Tanya's body, clothes, and zip ties at the crime scene. This led the detectives to consider the possibility of multiple culprits being involved in the double homicide. Equipped with this new finding in the case, detectives asked famous TV station Q13 Fox for help. The station then featured Tanya and Jay's case with fresh updates twice on their hit local TV show, Washington's Most Wanted, that had already helped capture 144 fugitives. And soon, the detectives started to receive tips from the viewers of the show. Victoria cold case detectives were finally able to identify the author of those threatening letters and track the writer to Seattle.
Adding to the horror, someone taunting the families with abusive letters about the deaths. This summer, a push to identify the killer and the author has yielded at least one answer. Washington State Police say they know who wrote the letters, and he's Canadian.
The man was arrested at Seattle's public library when the detectives carried out a sting operation. At the time he was identified, the man was in his 70s and was a Canadian citizen. Upon taking a closer look into his life, detectives found out that the man also had severe mental health issues. He grew up in several Canadian foster care homes and faced abuse throughout his childhood. And probably as a result of that, he faced problems in his professional life and blamed fellow Canadians for his troubles.
I told him right up front, listen, we know that you wrote these letters. And he said, yeah, I did do it.
When the detectives confronted him about his insensitive actions towards the families of Tanya and Jay, he didn't try to hide anything. In fact, he readily admitted that he was the one who wrote those filthy letters.
In fact, I knew that you guys would probably be looking for me because I saw a little clip on TV where I recognized my letters myself.
Police say the letter writer is a homeless man who wrote the notes during a particularly low point in his life. He told investigators he was sorry about what he'd done and even said that he once tried to contact the families here in Victoria to tell them that.
Detectives sat down with him and interviewed him for several hours and finally came to the conclusion that he had nothing to do with the murders of Tanya and Jay. Neither did he have any connection to the person who actually committed the crime, nor did he know anything about the murders other than what had already been shared over the news. Because the statute of limitations for harassment was 3 years, the man couldn't be charged with a crime in regard to the letters he sent the victims' families and was let go. 8 more years went by, and Tanya and Jay's killer remained on the loose. But things changed when Joseph James D'Angelo, responsible for multiple assaults and murders, was identified after evading law enforcement for almost 43 years. Also known as the Golden State Killer, Joseph was identified using genetic genealogy and was arrested on April 25, 2018 in California. Inspired by the breakthrough arrest in the Golden State Killer case, Detective Scharf realized that the use of genetic genealogy held great potential in solving cold cases like Tanya and Jay's, even though the technology was quite new at the time. It seemed like the reliable option he was left with. Detective Scharf presented Tanya and Jay's case to the scientists at Parabon Nanolabs, and after a detailed discussion, the lab decided to upload individual A's DNA profile to GED Match on April 27, 2018. Shortly after that, Snohomish County detectives released a paraben DNA snapshot composite of the killer that had been created based on the DNA evidence. These composites were based on predictions of what the suspect would possibly have looked like at ages 25, 45, and 65. As a result of the paraben analysis, it was believed that the suspect was a Caucasian male of European descent with hazel or green eyes, fair skin, possible freckles, and likely male pattern baldness. Once individual A's DNA had been uploaded, genetic genealogist C.C. Moore was called into work on the case. She had been following Tanya and Jay's case for years and looking at how 2 young, innocent lives were cut short. She felt a personal connection to it.
I had had a lot of doubts whether this was the right thing for me to do, and I finally made the decision, okay, I'm gonna do this.
It was a case she had been following for years and felt a personal connection to.
Moore's parents were from the Pacific Northwest, and she was the same age as Tanya Van Cuylenborg.
She was killed right when I was graduating high school and going on to college, and my life was just really beginning, and hers ended so tragically. And so I think it always stuck with me.
Genealogist C.C. Moore logged on to GED Match to examine individual A's DNA and look for any potential matches. And soon enough, she was able to find 2 profiles who shared enough DNA with individual A to be his second cousins. In this case, the cousins shared DNA with individual A, but not with each other. This meant that they were related to the suspect, individual A, on different branches of his family tree. But to figure out who individual A was, Cece needed to build a family tree using the 2 profiles who were most likely the suspect's second cousins.
Now, fortunately, one of the people at the top of that list had a really unique name.
And what was her name?
Chelsea Rustad.
I really like to solve puzzles, and genealogy kind of is like that. It offers you this endless stream of blanks to fill in. My name's Chelsea Rustad, and in 2013, I began my search for my own family history.
The second profile belonged to a woman who went by the name Chelsea Rustad. In 2015, Chelsea Rustad, a woman from Tumwater, Washington, had uploaded her DNA to a public database in the hopes of exploring other branches of her family tree and finding more relatives. And although Chelsea was not related to either Jay or Tanya, she had never thought that one day this process would prompt a visit from cold case detectives, and her DNA would help solve the mystery of who killed Tanya and Jay. Cece was equipped with all the information she needed. She built the family trees of those 2 top matches, and soon she was able to discover how and where they converged. And just within 2 hours, Cece was able to examine the resulting family tree and find the name of the person she believed was the killer of Jay and Tanya. Cece identified individual A as William Earl Talbot II. Finally, there was a name and face to this suspect whose identity had remained a mystery for 31 years. Upon hearing the name, Detective Jim Scharf ran it through the system to check if there were any records. He was surprised to learn that Talbot had no felony convictions in the past. This was a person who had eluded capture for more than 3 decades, and using the power of genetic genealogy, Cece was able to identify this person in just 2 hours. Cece didn't want to waste even a second after identifying Talbot, determined to learn about him and his whereabouts. She had already started looking for Talbot online, but she could barely find anything about him. There were no records of any marriages or kids. Years ago in 2013, Chelsea Rustad, she was able to hunt down his sisters and father on social media, who had no clue about the investigation into Tanya and Jay's case. About 2 years ago, before she submitted her DNA to any websites, Chelsea Googled her grandfather's sister, Blanche, and found out a lot of information about her and her family online. Blanche's daughter was Patty Talbot, who had 3 daughters and 1 son, and the son was no one else but William Earl Talbot. The Talbots turned out to be Chelsea's second cousins. Chelsea connected with the 2 of the sisters over Facebook, but their brother William Earl Talbot was a mystery.
This guy was just kind of a question mark, off the grid.
Even after she uploaded her DNA to Ancestry.com and GED Match in 2015, she figured William Talbot was probably estranged from his family and didn't give it much thought. So when those investigators showed up on her doorstep in 2018, she was in complete shock. Now that Detective Scharf knew about Talbot's family members, he embarked on a journey to speak with all of them, and while interviewing Talbot's friends and family, Detective Scharf uncovered more details about Talbot and his past. In audio-taped interviews with Talbot's sisters, Detective Scharf learned that Talbot had a history of anger and violence. He was a troubled child and carried all the wrong traits into his teens and young adulthood. During the mid-1970s, when Talbot was only an 11-year-old child, his father was seriously injured in a motorcycle accident, and Talbot would still lash out amid that family crisis. He would get into heated arguments with his sisters a lot and would end up hurting them physically and emotionally. As he grew older and stronger, the beatings turned more severe, and the sisters almost felt defensiveless going against him. One of Talbot's sisters even said that he beat her up so badly one time that her tailbone broke and she had to be admitted to the hospital.
He was a really angry kid. He beat me up, broke my telephone. I had to go to the hospital.
Yeah, he'd be a bonehead, but not to the point of attacking or killing somebody, no.
Even while each of his sisters confirmed that Talbot was a violent person, they also felt he would not go to the extent to assault and murder someone. Detectives had enough evidence to know that they were following the correct lead, and given Talbot's violent past, his actions were sitting well with the details of Jay and Tanya's case. All that the detectives needed now was to make an arrest. However, that wasn't going to be very easy. To make an arrest, Detective Scharf needed to confirm that the DNA found on Tanya's body and pants at the crime scene belonged to Talbot. Investigators found out that Talbot used to drive a truck and was a resident of Seattle. Detectives decided to tail him for a few days, looking for opportunities to collect his DNA. And on May 8, 2018, he dropped a cup from the window of his truck and drove away. Detectives quickly collected the cup as evidence and rushed to the Washington State Patrol Lab that same day. While the detectives awaited the results, scientists at the lab tested the DNA sample from the cup against the sample of individual A. Forensic scientist Lisa Collins confirmed that the DNA on Talbot's cup was a perfect match to that of individual A and broke the news to Detective Scharf. After reaching dozens of dead ends and following hundreds of leads for more than 30 years, on May 17, 2018, then 55-year-old William Earl Talbot II was finally arrested and taken into custody in Seattle. The first call Detective Scharf made after the arrest was to Tanya's older brother, John Van Queilenborg.
Told me that, he goes, yeah, we got him, we've arrested him. And I said, really? My first question was, well, where is he? All those years of all the phone calls and all the information, all of a sudden, finally someone had been arrested. You know, this is the first arrest in 31 years.
John was also present at the press conference on May 18, 2018, when Jim Scharf and the other detectives made the announcement of Talbot's arrest. John said the information about his little sister's killer being finally caught after 31 years sent a chill down his spine. He described it as an overwhelming feeling. Jay's sister, Laura, and mother, Leona, attended the conference as well. Laura said that it was a feeling of mixed emotions. On a similar note, Leona described it as a bittersweet feeling. On one hand, she was happy to gain some form of closure, but on the other, she still didn't have her only son, and nothing could bring him back. Although Talbot's DNA was a match to the foreign bodily fluids found on Tanya, her pants, and on the zip ties, detectives conducted another test and confirmed that the palm print found on the back door of the van Jay and Tanya were traveling in was also a match to Talbot. Talbot was initially charged only with first-degree murder of Tanya Van Queilenborg. However, nearly a month after his arrest, on May 17, 2018, he was also charged with first-degree murder of Jay Rollin Cook. On June 16, 2018, Talbot claimed that he was innocent and pleaded not guilty at a preliminary hearing. Detectives found out that when the murders were committed, Talbot was 24 years old and lived in Woodinville from 1984 to 1993. His house was only 7 miles from where Jay's body was found. In 1987, Talbot was working as a delivery driver and made regular stops in the area where Jay and Tanya were headed to pick up the furnace parts. Additionally, detectives also learned that Talbot was fired after a few months before he committed the murders. Talbot's former roommate, too, came forward to inform the detectives that he had seen a blue blanket in his home and in Talbot's car. It was similar to the one found on Jay's body at the crime scene. The roommate also confirmed that Talbot had a difficult relationship with his relatives, particularly with his sisters. He added that Talbot was involved in drugs and had personality changes whenever he was under the influence of alcohol. He also recalled seeing a bronze van, resembling the one Jay and Tanya were traveling in, outside of his home on a misty day in the fall of 1987. Finally, he recalled that Talbot would often take him to the same area where Jay's body was later found. Facing 2 charges of first-degree murder in the case of Tanya and Jay, Talbot was held on $2.5 million of bail. On Tuesday, June 11, 2019, Talbot went on trial for Jay and Tanya's murders. He pleaded not guilty to both the charges. Before the trial could even begin, there was a slight complication. One of the jurors, Juror 40 in particular, told both the state and the defense that as a child, she had witnessed her mother go through a lot of domestic abuse. She couldn't say for sure whether her personal experiences in life would affect her decisions in the trial until the time came. But before the defense and state agreed to move ahead with the trial, Juror 40 promised to give her very best in the trial. In the court, Talbot was being represented by attorney Rachel 40 with John Scott, acting as her co-counsel. Rachel and John argued that there was an actual innocent explanation for Talbot's DNA ending up on Tanya's body and pants.
Every indication of the DNA found from my client indicated consensual.
They admit that Talbot had with Tanya, but they deny he raped or killed her or Jay Cook.
Talbot's defense claimed that Talbot did have a sensual encounter with Tanya, but it was fully consensual. Additionally, the defense claimed that both Tanya and Jay were killed by someone else. The prosecution countered these claims and highlighted that it would not make sense for Tanya to indulge in any kind of activity with Talbot, since she was with Jay, her boyfriend, in a foreign country, and also on her menstrual period at the time. Rachel's co-counsel John Scott said there was not enough evidence to prove Talbot guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. He pointed out that Tanya and Jay had been missing for several days before their bodies were discovered, which implied that the couple must have come across their actual killer much later on. In addition to that, Talbot's lawyer said the detectives were unable to link Talbot to the type of gun that had been used to kill Tanya. Neither were they able to link Talbot to the pack of cigarettes that had been stuffed in Jay's mouth, and nor to the red-colored dog collars used to strangle Jay. Deputy Prosecutor Matt Baldock said that if Talbot's DNA being found on Tanya's body and her clothes was not enough to prove Talbot's guilt, then Talbot's DNA being found on the zip ties and the palm print found on the back of Jay's van, being a perfect match to Talbot, confirmed his involvement in the murders beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, Prosecutor Baldock highlighted the fact that Talbot used to live merely 7 miles from where Jay's body was discovered. Prosecutor Baldock said that this proved the connection between Jay's murder, Tanya's murder, and the van. Towards the end of the trial, defense attorney Rachel 40 argued that Detective Jim Scharf from the cold case team had tunnel vision. Rachel pointed out that Detective Scharf and his team jumped to conclusions, never stopped to consider that perhaps the person who left the DNA was not the murderer.
They never stopped to consider that perhaps the person who left the DNA was not the murderer.
Talbot chose not to take the stand in his defense, and his lawyer seemed pretty confident that the jury would agree and there was not enough evidence to prove Talbot guilty. In their closing arguments, the defense told the jury that the police were unreasonably focused on the DNA. In the prosecution's closing statement, Baldock said that the only reasonable theory in the case was that Talbot had overpowered the young couple. He had come prepared and had planned to assault Tanya and then kill her and Jay. Baldock pointed out that Talbot had zip ties, gloves, and a gun. It was all premeditated, and he clearly knew what he was doing. Juror 40, along with 11 other jurors, had been hearing witness testimonies for 2 weeks, and they began deliberating on June 25, 2019. After 3 days of deliberation, on June 28, 2019, they reached a verdict and announced Talbot guilty and convicted him for the murders of 18-year-old Tanya Van Queilenborg and 20-year-old Jay Rollin Cook. The verdict came as a shock to the defense, as they confidently expected the opposite results. Almost a month after his conviction, on July 24, 2019, William Earl Talbot II was handed 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
The only possible sentence on each count is to impose a sentence of life without possibility of release.
Jay and Tanya's families were present in the courtroom, and so was Chelsea Restad, the only relative of Talbot, who was there to support the victims. Chelsea had never spoken to either Jay or Tanya's family and was nervous about facing them in court. But with their blessing, she decided to attend Talbot's sentencing, where she met Tanya's older brother John for the first time. More than 2 years later, when Talbot was locked up behind bars and everything seemed perfect, a controversy rolled in. Talbot made the appeal on the grounds that his right to an impartial jury was violated because of a biased juror. Juror 40 had deliberated his case. The double murder conviction of William Earl Talbot II, who had been found guilty in the homicide of Tanya and Jay, was overturned due to juror bias. The decision was handed out on Monday, December 8, 2021, when the court stated that they were not sure whether the juror was completely free of bias or not when she made her decision in the case. This was the first time that the defense attorneys had ever challenged the forensic genealogy. The Division I Court of Appeals in Washington State admitted that there was room for error. They went on to say that they could not conclude that Juror 40 was sufficiently free of bias and that Talbot was provided a fair and impartial jury. This ended up being the reason behind the court's reversal of Talbot's conviction. Furthermore, Talbot and his attorneys raised many other issues related to the evidence in the case, citing the additional court papers, which Talbot prepared himself. This decision obviously did not sit well with the prosecutors and the families of Jay and Tanya. Later, they appealed the ruling of Talbot's conviction being overturned to the state's highest court. In September 2022, Chief Justice Stephen Gonzalez noted during oral arguments that Juror 40 had not made any statements that showed unquestionable bias or a blatant conflict of interest. The court emphasized that if a party allowed a juror to be seated, and if they did not exhaust their peremptory challenges, they could not appeal on the basis that a juror should have been excused for cause. 3 months later, in December 2022, the state Supreme Court reinstated Talbot's murder convictions. The court stated that Talbot's defense attorneys should have dismissed the juror prior to the trial if they felt she was biased, and since Talbot's defense attorneys did not use their option to excuse her when the trial took place in June 2019, they couldn't file any further appeals on the same grounds. Ever since Talbot was arrested in 2018, he has remained in custody at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington, based on the arguments about insufficient evidence, the inadequacy of the police investigation, and a series of other alleged missteps at trial that were not weighed in the State Court of Appeals' first ruling. Talbot's attorney planned to file another appeal. Ever since his conviction in 2019, Talbot has maintained his innocence. Chelsea Ristad, Talbot's second cousin, said that her sympathy was for Jay and Tanya and their families, despite her genetic ties to Talbot. She was proud that her DNA helped bring a ruthless killer to justice, describing her role in the case and her connection to Talbot. Chelsea went on to write a book about her experience and called it Inherited Secrets. Although nothing could bring Tanya and Jay back, Talbot's conviction did bring their families some form of closure. Jay's mother, Leona, said that she still had one of Jay's old sweaters in her drawer.
Some of us wanted a shirt or a sweater. You could wear them. You could put them to your nose and smell him. I still have that old sweater in my dresser drawer.
Tanya's father, William, passed away on May 14, 1997, at the age of 62. He never got a chance to see his daughter get justice. Tanya's mother, Jean, passed away on March 3, 2020, at the age of 87. She left in peace, knowing that her daughter's killer would never be a free man. Both Jean and William were laid to rest at the Ross Bay Cemetery, where Tanya rested in peace. Her gravestone still had the last line of a poem Tanya had written when she was 17 inscribed on it. It read, "There is a place that I know of, where up above there flies a dove, and slowly, as it turns to dawn, she parts her wings, and then she's gone." How do you think Talbot overpowered both Jay and Tanya? Do you think he acted alone, or did he have some help? Is it possible that Talbot had more victims who cannot be linked to him? May 15, 1984, the Ozaukee County Sheriff James Johnson received an emergency phone call from a resident on Maple Road in the town of Grafton. The resident was on his way to get the early morning newspaper at 5:45 a.m. when he came across something unusual lying on the front porch of his house. As he got a closer look to investigate further, he would notice a naked body of a young girl who had presumably been assaulted. The snow had fully covered the body as her bludgeon had laid, coloring the white snow crimson, marking the barbaric fate she had gone through. Even the nearby trees and the road had splashes of blood all around it, portraying one of the most cold-blooded crime scenes Wisconsin had seen in a lifetime. When the police arrived at the scene, the harsh weather conditions had already gotten the body to a pneumonic state, and although they were unaware whether the young girl may make it out alive, the ferocious extent of the assault was quite evident. The resident had some speculation that the victim might still be breathing, so he also contacted the rescue, who declared her dead soon after. She was found lying on her back with her arms and legs spread to the side. The body was recovered in a half-naked state from the waist down, apart from her socks, which had been partially removed. The jacket, scarf, and sweater she was found in were pulled up over her head, exposing the entirety of the rest of her body. The face and neck had clear marks of bruises, which just from an outlook could clearly be striked off as signs of heavy assault. By the time the body was found by the rescue team, her hair was matted with blood and brain tissue. The right side of her skull showcased heavy blows, being the likely cause of death. Detective Frederick Mueller, who was one of the first attendants to the scene, froze in his shoes after witnessing the horrific nature of the scene. The backup team and forensics quickly searched through the field and gathered some primal pieces of evidence to the case. They located tire impressions over the snow, which were fresh due to the snowfall last evening, along with blood spatters found all across the scene. An officer noticed a pack of Marlboro cigarettes lying at the corner, inches away from where the victim's body was found. The girl possessed a men's sapphire high school ring, which had Bowden High 1983 carved on one side and Glen 83 on the other. The rest of her garments, jeans, and shoes were found laying beside, not far across. There was no murder weapon. Nothing could be found to presume what she might have been attacked with. Her hands were bagged to preserve any evidence, and then the body was laid over a bedsheet ready to be taken down to the hospital. The inspection found the victim's identity to be 18-year-old Tracy Lynn Hammerberg. Tracy Lynn Hammerberg was born on March 7, 1966 in Milwaukee, Oregon, eldest daughter to Judy Kleblund and Harlan Hammerberg. She was raised along her half-sister, Jennifer Lubecki. The entire family moved to Saukville, Wisconsin in 1976. After her move to Wisconsin, she attended the local high school in the neighborhood, Port Washington High School, and settled down with the new crowd effortlessly. The 18-year-old had a fun personality which often put her under the spotlight in most groups. Being the popular girl in school, Tracy certainly maintained a bigger social group compared to people of her age, which also meant she was more prone to bad company. She started babysitting neighborhood kids to earn some extra bucks for herself, and on the tragic night of December 14, 1984, Tracy Hammerberg would leave the house she was babysitting at for the very last time. The family identified the traces of hers by the tattoo Tracy sported along her arm, a red heart with a blue spear piercing across. The autopsy found some dark hair materials over her body, which certainly weren't her own. There were numerous fractures to her skull overlapping one another, pointing to the possibility that she might have been attacked with a rounded object. Tracy had severe bruising around her chest cavity below the collarbone, suggesting that someone had stomped over her. The cause of death was possibly blunt trauma, but petechial rashes on the skin were indicating manual strangulation, also as a possible cause. The scar tissues near her abdomen made clear that she went through physical assault. The barbaric sense of the murder hit the news headlines the next day, making it to the front pages of all the city's newspapers. Civilians were horrified to the core. Every parent's worst nightmare was happening right before their eyes, while the police were still looking out for possible leads. Judy and Harlan Hammerberg hadn't filled out a missing person report, as they were accustomed with Tracy's lifestyle. She would often stay out late and roam around freely, engaging in drinking and other social gatherings. For this reason, Tracy's disappearance didn't really surprise a soul in the family until they turned the news on. Tracy's half-sister, Jennifer Lubecki, and other immediate family members first recognized her on the live telecast of leading news channels. Tracy's family called the police, saying they got to know about her on the news and confirmed that their daughter hadn't been home since the previous day. They identified her by the classic red dyed hair and the tattoo of a heart on her arm with a blue arrow going across. The family also recognized the ring, which was gifted to her by her boyfriend, and Tracy's body was eventually brought back home. Investigating further into her background, it was revealed that Tracy had an inclination for chasing trouble in life. She would hang around with strangers on many occasions, some of whom were youngsters who had served time at juvenile detention and were known to be troublemakers. But the main question was raised on how she ended up on the driveway and what exactly happened on the night of December 14, 1984. Tracy was living along with her half-sister and stepfather, fueling up a rebellious character, which for her parents was nothing but beyond their control. The police found a previously recorded file of hers when Tracy had once run away from home. She apparently had frugal clashes with her stepfather, causing her to be in and out of the home a lot. A friend of Tracy's disclosed to the police that her stepdad had previously tried to make unwanted advances to her, which explained her erratic pattern of behavior. But Tracy wasn't a quitter. She wanted to have a better future for herself and planned to move out of the state with her boyfriend in North Dakota. Things were finally looking up for Tracy, but the unfair, tragic call of fate ruined everything in a blink. On December 14th, Tracy was babysitting for a woman named Helen Michaels between the span of 7:20 and 9:45 p.m. She got a call around 10 p.m. asking her to turn up at a nearby grocery store. She left the house where she was babysitting after informing Helen over a call, promising to be back at her place the next morning by 7:30 a.m. Tracy walked to Saukville grocery store and then met up with friends. They drove to Quaid's Tavern in Port Washington, where she told the bartender she was going to party in Grafton. Then the friends went to a house party on Garfield Road in Port Washington, where they played a beer drinking game called Quarters and smoked marijuana. Her friends offered her a ride back, but she declined as she wanted to go on a night stroll. She is believed to have left the party on foot at around 12:30 a.m. It would have been a 3.7-mile walk along State Highway 33. This was not uncommon for her, as she often walked back home late at night. The streets of Grafton, where she was found moments later, were infamous for its isolated streets and shady areas. This also proved the suspicion that the killer knew his way around the town and was no rank outsider. Detectives received a new source of evidence from a nearby resident about a green pickup truck she saw late at night. The man who was reported to be driving the vehicle was in his late 30s with medium brown hair. He left the car running at the corner of the street for about a half an hour and then came back and took off. Sheriff Johnson and his team were successful in tracking back the owner of the truck, and he was found to be a hunter. He confessed during the interrogation that he noticed another car with squealing wheels and no headlights as he was passing by. He said he didn't get a good look at the car, but assumed it to be a station wagon of sorts. The police were tracking this car's time frame, as few other witnesses also confirmed seeing it. Meanwhile, the investigation disclosed that Tracy usually smoked menthol cigarettes, strengthening the assumption further that the pack of Marlboros recovered near the body belonged to the killer. The social circle of Tracy raised further issues to push the investigation along, claiming that the number of people in the suspect list were way too many. The Behavioral Analysis Unit helped the detectives by creating a criminal profile. Witnesses numbering in the hundreds were interviewed, and more than 400 men were eliminated as suspects through blood typing and DNA analysis. Murders were extremely rare in Ozaukee County, and the kind of team the police required to investigate such a highly sensitive case was something they lacked in the year 1984. This kind of case usually left out a possibility that the killer might strike out again, and unfortunately he did. In a disturbingly similar pattern of events, a friend of Tracy's, Wendy Smith, was found to be murdered in July 1985. Aware of the fact that there was only a span of 6 months between both incidents, the state of Wisconsin was now on alert, treating these as a chain of murders. As far as the disappearance of Wendy was concerned, she initially was out with her friends and then left the house to meet her mother, who was working at the tavern. However, she never showed up at the location. Eventually, her body was found in a ditch along the hillside, 24 hours after she went missing. The Ozaukee Sheriff's Department and Washington Police joined their forces to tackle the case. Detectives panned out investigating on a list of suspects using the help of FBI, suggesting that both the murders happened within the same social circle and followed the exact similar pattern of events. With the vicious assaults involved, they were now sure that the killer was someone whom both the victims knew previously. The forensics report, however, turned the course of events, as the DNA samples recovered from Wendy's body didn't match with those on Tracy's, although the trace samples gave out some valuable information on the killer's profile. The forensic reports confirmed the man to be of O-positive blood type. Additionally, 2 different kinds of enzymes were found in their DNA, one of which was only found in 3% of the entire U.S. population. The information might be fairly primitive to today's date, but the blood sample itself could eliminate 98% of the suspects the police were holding. The investigators encouraged the family and friends of both the victims to volunteer for blood tests. The hundreds of samples collected were carefully sent out to the state crime lab for analysis, taking weeks and months at times to bring in the results. After exhausting almost every possible resource they could, investigators were at a loss with no matches. The case soon hit the rock bottom of the investigators' pile of cases, and with no other leads to work with, it was soon tossed off under cold cases. In April 2018, over 2,000 miles away in California, police finally tasted success regarding a notorious serial killer and rapist named Joseph James D'Angelo, who was called the infamous Golden State Killer. The man has been charged with over 50 counts of assault and 13 counts of murder for the time period between 1974 and 1986. The technique that helped in tracking the cold case was called forensic genealogy. The Ozaukee Police Department contacted the forces to run over the case of Tracy Hammerberg using this new forensic technology. The police reopened the case in March 2019, and by the end of September, they had 2 lead suspects. Almost 35 years later, Tracy's murderer was finally under the leash of the county. 2 brothers named Eugene and Philip Cross were identified to be of exact match with the DNA samples. The Cross brothers lived within the same neighborhood of Port Washington and Saukville in the late 80s. While Eugene was affirmed to be long dead, Philip Cross led out to be the most likely suspect to Tracy's murder. His background history was an identical fit to the criminal's psychological profile. Philip was the loner kid who hung around the popular crowd, trying desperately to fit into the socially acceptable norms. He also had a previously recorded history and was someone who was initially overlooked during the prior investigation. The police were almost at the cusp of grabbing their suspect when they found out that Philip had died of a drug overdose in 2012.
I was mad that I did not get to say my piece and that he didn't get punished at all for it.
On August 21, 2012, Philip Cross died at the Diamond Inn in Milwaukee. Fortunately, because of the drug overdose, police got their hands on the autopsy, which had his DNA samples recorded. The state crime lab confirmed the DNA to be an exact match with Tracy Hammerberg's murderer. And 36 years later, the cold case of Tracy's horrifying murder finally came to an end. While the state of Wisconsin lies relieved by finally putting an end to Tracy Hammerberg's tragedy, the family and friends to the young lives lost still mourn the unfortunate turn of events. The friends we swear our golden days to can often lead us to our graves. For Tracy and Wendy, their killer was hiding right before their eyes. We urge our viewers to remain cautious and keep an eye out for their loved ones.